Good morning and welcome to the November 30th, 2021 regular meeting of the Lane County Board of Commissioners. To say we have a full agenda is an understatement, so we'll just get started. The first item is adjustments to the agenda. Are there any adjustments, Mr. Mokrahejski? No? Emergency business. Is there any emergency business? Seeing none, we are now on item 3, public comment. To the public watching this meeting, when you registered to watch in this temporary virtual format, you were registered in our system as attendees. Attendees are webinar participants who are audience members viewing the meeting. Your microphone and your webcam have been automatically muted as attendees. We are now, however, opening the meeting for public comment. Excuse me. If you wish to participate in public comment, please raise your virtual hand to be recognized by pressing the hand icon. When public comment begins, our meeting organizer, Ms. Diana Jones, will call names and serve as moderator. When your name is called, you will be given up to 3 minutes for public comment. When your 3 minutes are up, I will let you know, and you will be muted very shortly thereafter, so we'll ask you to wrap up. So the next name can be called. You can watch the meeting as long as you choose. We'll try to give everyone the opportunity to speak that has public comment. And at this time, Ms. Jones, do we have public comment?
Thank you, Chair Barney. I am checking our attendees right now. And yes, we do have people signed up for public comment. At this time, if you would raise your hand, please only press the button once, as if you press it again, it will take your hand down. I will begin our public comment with Danny Marino, followed by Ann Nealand. Danny, I will unmute your microphone and you may begin your public comment.
First, I want to thank the commissioners for telling us last time that you heard us loud and clear, and that you will not apply these blanket vaccine mandates in our community. Sincere gratefulness, and thank you so much. During Thanksgiving, I learned that the state of Oregon has been quietly developing the Oregon Digital Vaccine Records web application. I had to carve time out of my holiday to research. It's important to say that I have been actively searching for opportunities for public comments at the state level, and that this one was nowhere to be found. The cat came out of the bag with little time for the public to respond. I participated in a feedback session yesterday in Spanish because the English one was already booked up or full. I asked questions and I was told that this application won't be mandatory, that it will be optional. I want that on the record because if we don't stop this, it won't be long until it becomes mandatory. This project is a problem because it gets us one step closer to developing more social segregation. We will not accept this, we will push back hard, and we will not comply. On another topic, I watched the clown that can barely read scripts Biden yesterday morning talk about the new variant, trying to keep pushing for everyone to be vaccinated. Well, guess what? That plan will never work. Their old tricks are no good for us anymore. These vaccines only kind of work for a few months, but don't worry, pharma got the booster. And so many people are so naive to believe that the boosters will protect you. Know that the UK is rolling out a plan to boost every 3 months. How many more times will you fall for this? Clown Biden also keeps repeating that the vaccines are free, when in reality, we pay for them with our taxes. People that can't even see that detail are true victims of years of psychological manipulation through the media. They lie to their faces and they just keep taking it. Hope is high though. Big teams of attorneys are working the law and making us proud, upholding our precious Constitution and fighting for our human rights. I'm still tracking the COVID-19 Oregon numbers, but I already stated my case and I won't keep repeating them. I'm working on some new ones that need time to build up. I have publicly informed you and sent you instructions on how to get each of the numbers that I have shared in the past, so your health advisors can put the word misinformation right back in their mouths. This push for the vaccine at a global level, including healthy children, is irresponsible, a disgrace to the art of medicine, and a big crime against humanity. The proof abounds. You just have to look. At the end of the day, I rejoice because the circus is crumbling right before our eyes. To everyone so worried about the virus, to conclude, here's some effective ideas. Stop watching CNN and listening to Fauci for a while. Try stop eating McDonald's and drinking so much soda and eating so much candy. Get blood work done and figure out what vitamins you're deficient on. Try working on strengthening your immune system. Your life will change. May justice, truth, and love win. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your public comment. I will now call Ann Neeland. Ann, I will unmute your microphone and you may begin your public comment. You will be followed by Sharon Underwood. Ann, you may begin.
Good. Thank you and good morning. I am assuming that this body is aware of the vaccine clinics that have been operating around the county to inject the experimental COVID gene therapy shot into children ages 5 to 11. Are you thinking that the county is doing the right thing with these clinics? That we are protecting our children perhaps? Or is this a point of pride for the county leadership? Well, think again. This is the most egregious, despicable, and immoral organized effort to experiment on our children with a potentially lethal cocktail that has ever happened in Lane County and wherever else it is happening. Don't you worry about the unsuspecting child being taken by their parent to get the injection that can cause myocarditis, permanent heart damage, other harms, and even death? How do you rationalize the risk of these known potential harms and the risk of unknown long-term harms that we have yet to discover from this experimental shot that may avoid COVID, which children have a 99.997% chance of surviving if they even get it at all? As US researchers suggest, boys ages 12 to 15 with no underlying medical conditions are 4 to 6 times more likely to be diagnosed with vaccine-related myocarditis than ending up in the hospital with COVID. There is just no justification to advance efforts to inject our children, and this county will be culpable for any adverse vaccine injuries suffered by our children, especially these new efforts targeted at 8 kids ages 5 to 11 in Lane County. You will have to live with these potentially devastating and tragic harms to our children if you fail to come forward to stop this immoral vaccination campaign in Lane County. In addition, I want to add that I strongly oppose the vaccine passports in Oregon or anywhere. These passports segregate society into 2 classes of people and assign privileges and rights accordingly. This is fundamentally wrong, immoral, and illegal. And despite promises of never again after the horrors of the Nazi Holocaust were revealed, here we are again facing divisive and discriminatory laws and policies creating 2 classes of people and coercing and compelling the still experimental COVID gene therapy injection in violation of the Nuremberg Code. It is outrageous. It is shameful. You are elected officials and you are being watched. We will see how you respond to the creeping but blatant assault on our freedoms and how you will stand against the encroaching tyranny in Oregon. You will be held to account for your actions or your failure to act. Thank you.
Thank you for your public comment. Our next presenter is Sharon Underwood, followed by Harry Sanger. Sharon, I will unmute your microphone and you may begin your public comment.
Thank you for keeping an open dialogue with Lane County citizens. I've worked in the field of medicine for almost 20 years. I've seen thousands of patients myself, and I've taught medical ethics to future doctors. As members involved in healthcare policy, you are also bound by the Hippocratic Oath, especially first do no harm. By mandating this messenger RNA treatment, which has been hastily approved under the emergency use and using coercion with vaccine health passes, this state is putting millions of people at risk of harm and death from this experimental treatment. Although these health passes are presented as voluntary and simply for record, they could quickly convert to use as vaccine passports as used in China. If you've studied any totalitarian regime in history, Civil liberties were taken away in increments until it was too late. I have no faith in Kate Brown or Oregon's predominant leadership to keep their promises. They have repeatedly disregarded not only the voice of the people, but their votes and pushed through their own predetermined agenda. The Bill of Rights and Constitution have been ignored by these politicians, which is why there is so much anger from the public. We expect you to follow the rules too, as we do. Mandates and vaccine passports are a pathway to CCP-style totalitarianism, a country that violates human rights as we speak, and also a method to alienate members of society who won't bend to the will of dictators who lack respect for medical autonomy. Those who are insisting on mandating and using coercion for this experimental treatment are the ones ignoring data, science, and medical principles. As of November, VAERS published 18,500 deaths, 29,000 disabilities, 21,000 life-threatening events, 98,000 ER visits, and 876,000 adverse events to the mRNA COVID treatment. Harvard was given $1 million to study for 3 years the accuracy of VAERS and concluded that less than 1% of incidents are reported. So multiply these numbers by 100. No other medical treatment has ever been allowed to remain after these many casualties. By coercing people to take this, the state is forcing millions to play Russian roulette with their health and even lives, including children who have less chance of harm from COVID than from the vaccine. Dr. Rogers, a PhD in statistics who also specializes in vaccine risk-benefit analysis, estimated that for every child that dies of COVID,
the 3 minutes are up. If you could possibly wrap up, that would be great.
Okay, 117 children would die from vaccine injury. I'm hoping that you respect the principles of democracy in this country and also the principles of the Hippocratic Oath. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. It's my understanding we have a lot of people that want to testify. So those that still will be commenting, please try to keep your comments to the 3-minute time. Thank you very much. Sorry, Ms. Jones.
No problem. Thank you, Chair Burney. Our next speaker is Harry Sanger, followed by Karen Kaplan. Harry, I will unmute your microphone and you may begin your public comment.
Thank you. Yes, there is a parent information session planned for today's Young Child Genetic Therapy Clinic, which is a more honest label since the shots being given aren't actually vaccines that confer immunity. Since this is not a vaccine, it doesn't make sense to call clinic opponents anti-vax. Something like informed consent matters might be a better label. I encourage anyone listening to show up today at Howard Elementary at 4:30 p.m. to see why parents in the community are concerned and hold dialogue instead of making assumptions. Informed consent can't exist when there is coercion paid for with public funds. Oregon voters were misled into passing a measure last year that decriminalized all drug use, yet public health messaging since then has been COVID propaganda. Not a single drug abuse ad has been financed as promised. Instead, we have state lottery funding prizes for getting the vaccine, county employees discriminated against for not getting the vaccine, and promises made that Lane County will not force vaccine passports. Yet the interim House Committee on COVID-19 response heard a presentation on November 17th about the Smart Health Card the state is already working on and plans to roll out this coming March. I request the Lane County Board of Commissioners immediately consider a proclamation denouncing vaccine passports and affirming that this idea violates basic human rights. What are human rights? Are they reserved for specific skin colors or sexual orientations? Are the unvaccinated not guaranteed human rights against discrimination? We repeatedly heard from Lane County that this was a plague of the unvaccinated, yet deaths are now higher this year with the vaccine than they were last year without. Australia locked down their borders to the unvaccinated, yet now has a confirmed case of the new scary Omicron variant that seems to spread rapidly but is less virulent, as everyone with a basic science education understood before COVID hysteria took hold. Remember, the news headlines counting up the deaths under Trump, conspicuously missing now that they don't tell the same story. If this is truly a burden borne by the unvaccinated, then surely there is a legitimate study showing excessively elevated death rates for the ever-dwindling number of unvaccinated, or perhaps unmodified is a better label for those who have elected not to receive an experimental genetic therapy for a disease most are almost certain to survive. County staff are making assumptions based on incomplete data sets that don't tell us how many more questionable PCR tests are being given to the unmodified who are required to test for jobs, access to sporting events, concerts, etc. Back to the protest. I hear Commissioner Farr may show up and there will be at least one board member from 4J. I also hear that Commissioner Farr believes the goal of all the authorities will be to create greater separation between anyone who might show up to demonstrate or protest and folks who want to use the clinic. This is a violation of First Amendment rights of free speech and should be setting off alarms with the human rights supporters among us today. None of the concerned citizens who believed informed consent matters want violence or confrontation. We want to present a side of the narrative that has been consistently suppressed and falsely labeled as misinformation. We want parents going in to be aware of the long understood low risk to their children from the virus and the unknown risk from a practically untested experimental gene therapy. We want parents to be aware an adverse reaction database exists and that reports have climbed astronomically with this vaccine compared to any recorded vaccine previously. Please encourage Lane County Sheriff to stand down and not suppress free speech. The only conflict that will be created will come from the authorities standing between concerned citizens and the public officials who don't want the people's voices to be heard. Thank you.
Thank you for your public comment. Our next speaker will be Sharon Kaplan, followed by Jim New. Sharon, I will unmute your microphone and you may begin your public comment.
Thank you again for working with the Citizens for Responsible Use of Plastics to review all the information on the request to ban polystyrene food containers in Lane County. As you know, we've been talking to the county commissioners about this for over a year. Thank you for the initial review and staff examination of this issue as a waste climate change issue. Through that hearing, you heard us and the urgency for this to be examined as a public health issue and not a waste or climate issue. Graciously, you sent it to the Public Health Advisory Committee for review. Several of us attended those meetings and worked with the PHAC to thoroughly examine the issue. The committee did an amazing job spending hours on a work session, a subcommittee, and independent research prior to submitting the recommendation to the commission that polystyrene is a carcinogen, and they have clearly recommended that the county proceed with an ordinance to ban it countywide. As I read the staff recommendation to not implement the ban, I want to point out that the initial and now resubmitted staff recommendation was focused on waste and climate change perspective while ignoring the issue of polystyrene as a public health issue, one that has been addressed and banned in the city of Eugene. I also want to point out that staff submitted the same comments and recommendation that it gave prior to looking at it as a public health issue. Though staff said it could have a financial impact of food service providers, it also found that in almost 2 years of full implementation in Eugene, there has been no notable impact or complaints from food service providers regarding costs. The Eugene ban has been successful without incidents or complaints of financial impact. The mention of the Oregon Recycling Modernization Bill likewise is something that will take over a decade to implement and does not address the immediate public health concerns that were examined by the Public Health Advisory Committee. I urge you to follow through on the due diligence of the Public Health Advisory Committee, the noted success of the Eugene polystyrene ban, and the importance and duty of protecting public health in Lane County. I urge you to take the final step in banning this noxious, cancerous material from food service providers in Lane County. The largest cities in Lane County are Florence and Eugene, and they have already banned it. And thus a full county ban will provide equity and public health safety for the entire county. Thank you so much for your work and your consideration of this ban.
Thank you for your public comment. Our next speaker is Jim New, followed by Cynthia Matterly. Jim, I will unmute your microphone and you may begin your public comment.
Thank you. My name is Jim New. I live in Ward 7 in Lane County. Lane County Board of Commissioners, I thank you for the opportunity to speak and for all your preparation for the meeting with understanding of your packet material. Staff has done a remarkable job in formulating the facts about the polystyrene, otherwise known as EPS. I'll highlight some of the findings that I am sure you are aware of, but bear repeating. Is EPS does not break down. It lingers in the water and the soil. It is found to be present in humans in studies by the CDC and leads to carcinogenesis. It should be avoided for food packaging, particularly hot foods. As a precautionary principle, a primary prevention and health care, EPS poses some level of risk to both humans and animals, as well as detrimental impact on the environment, both short and long term. Some of the recommendations are prudent to explore options to minimize exposure in Lane County. Efforts to minimize primary source of exposure ingestion should be considered due to potential negative health consequences and potential burden on landfills and environmental impacts of EPS use. Minimizing EPS products in Lane County could positively impact local environment. The county is developing a climate action plan. Listed is a Short Mountain landfill as a big contributor to county greenhouse gas emissions, and a reduction of waste to landfill is highly recommended. Considering all of these facts on EPS provided by county staff and scientific reports, I urge the county to join the cities of Eugene and Florence and ban EPS in Lane County. Thank you for your time and for your consideration.
Thank you for your public comment. I will now call on Cynthia Matherly, I apologize for that, followed by Nicholas Anselmo. Cynthia, I will unmute your microphone and you may begin your public comment. Cynthia, I do show you are self-muted.
Oh, thank you.
Go.
Sorry about that. Thank you, commissioners, for taking time to discuss an important topic, the health hazard polystyrene foam poses to Lane County residents. These topics bear repeating. Polystyrene foam is also called EPS, trade name styrofoam. Here are a few reasons why it's so toxic. 1, foods and beverages in polystyrene foam cups and containers leach toxic substances, especially with hot drinks or reheated leftovers. Oily foods like French fries, burgers, pizzas, salad dressings, foods, and acidic beverages like alcohol, beer, and wine. Most likely a carcinogen, styrene is a neurotoxin and accumulates in fatty tissue. Adverse health effects include fatigue, reduced concentration, abnormal pulmonary function, disrupted hormone function, headache, and eyes, nose irritation. Serving babies and children hot, oily, acidic foods and beverages in single-use polystyrene containers and cups at daycare centers, schools, and restaurants poses greater health risks to them. 2, in the manufacture of polystyrene products, workers are exposed to styrene, leading to symptoms of headache, fatigue, weakness, impaired hearing, depression, effects on kidney function. Deaths associated with lung cancer, ovarian cancer, and chronic obstructive pulmonary disease are found among such workers. 3, polystyrene foam foodware can take hundreds of years to break down in certain environments, and the majority of this single-use foodware is not recycled. 4, it contributes to air pollution and climate change. Burned or incinerated, it releases toxic carbon monoxide in the air. The manufacturing process releases harmful hydrocarbons and forms a dangerous air pollutant at ground level called tropospheric ozone, associated with health effects of wheezing, shortness of breath, nausea, asthma, and bronchitis. 5, polystyrene foam manufacturing is located near BIPOC communities, increasing their risk for severe health issues, especially the most disadvantaged and vulnerable, including babies and children. 6, polystyrene foam is an environmental hazard from start to finish. It harms wildlife as it makes its way into the environment, clogging drains and waterways. Land and marine animals are harmed or killed. Studies show microscopic pieces digested by marine life enter our own food chain and bodies. Attachment A from County Health and Human Services recommends action reducing toxic polystyrene foam foodware countywide. We ask the county to follow the example of hundreds of cities and counties and municipalities in the USA that have already banned it. Thank you for your time and all your thoughtful considerations to ban single-use polystyrene foodware.
Thank you for your public comment. Our next speaker is Nicholas Anselmo, followed by, one moment, Tom Kreider. Nicholas, I will unmute your microphone and you may begin your public comment.
Thanks for giving me my First Amendment right to speak. I was harassed by the board of the ethics members for expressing my First Amendment right to free speech. I would like to say that it speaks volumes that we're still in virtual comments when probably you've all been back, maybe exception of Jay, and we're still doing virtual. And as as your actions speak much louder than your words, that you've all been vaccinated. So what are you afraid of? You are all cowards for continuing to do online virtual talks and virtual communication. Don't your vaccine
Mr. Anselmo, I do show you've self-muted. Mr. Anselmo, I'm not sure if you can hear me anymore, but I do show your microphone self-muted.
Oh, no, I can't.
There you go. Whoop, now you self-mute. There you go.
I did not self-mute. I did not self-mute. I did not touch it at all. But anyways, you guys have you show cowardice and lack of leadership since that we're still on this virtual meeting. When are we going to not be in virtual meeting? When are you going to get out of your cave and out of your basement and face life and have some courage? Your vaccines work. You're not showing that the vaccines work, and you expect people to take these genetic manipulation devices and you show that they don't even work. What is your stance? What is your defense on having virtual meetings if these vaccines work? And they're not even vaccines, as previously mentioned. People talk about environmental toxins and everything, and this is directly put into your bodies. It's disgusting and it's blatant. And I think that you guys need to seriously wake up, because people are waking up and we're seeing what you're doing, and it is pathetic. And we are losing all faith in our leadership locally and regionally, in the state level and a global level. And it's being seen all around the world, and your colors are showing. So when are we going to be non-virtual? When are your gene therapy systems going to work? I would like to know that. And I'd like to see that in your actions now, not tomorrow, not yesterday, now.
Thank you for your public comment. I will now call on Tom Kreider. Mr. Kreider, I will go ahead and unmute your microphone and you may begin your public comment. I do show you are self-muted. There you go.
Good morning. My name is Tom Kreider and I live in Ward 4. I first want to address the memo from Alex Kyler and Jocelyn Warren. Their memo states that the public comments regarding the ban of restaurant polystyrene focused on its impacts as solid waste. That statement is not accurate. The primary concern of the public comments about the use of restaurant polystyrene were that it is a public health concern impacting human health, and as litter contaminates our environment and affects the health of other living animals. One wonders why the Board of County Commissioners would seek a recommendation from the Health Advisory Board if restaurant polystyrene were a solid waste issue. The Health Advisory Committee has recommended that as there is a level of health risk, restaurant polystyrene should be restricted in Lane County. Polystyrene, known as vinyl benzene, contains styrene, ethylene, pentane, and benzene, a known carcinogen. Polystyrene containers leach styrene and benzene, chemicals with known toxic properties. Testing has shown that more leaching occurs when the contents are hot and/or contain fat. If someone buys hot food, fatty food, soup, or coffee in a polystyrene container, then more toxins from that container leach into the food. Over time, these chemicals can cause severe health problems. Styrene exposure increases the risk of leukemia and lymphoma and is a neurotoxin. This alone is enough reason to avoid polystyrene containers. In 2018, the World Health Organization reclassified styrene as a probable carcinogen. While the EPA does not classify it as a carcinogen, it noted that animal cancer studies provided evidence poor carcinogenicity. Several other organizations, including the International Agency for Research on Cancer and the Department of Health and Human Services, consider it to be carcinogenic. In conclusion, we are aware of some of the choices humans have made that threaten our health and welfare. By having a perspective that we must make choices for public and environmental good, Lane County can be recognized as a leader in the state and in the nation. I urge the Lane County Board of Commissioners to ban restaurant polystyrene, and I thank you for all your work.
Thank you for your public comment. At this time, I do not see any additional hands raised to give public comment. I will call one more time for hands to up. One just went up. Peggy Thomas, I will unmute your microphone and you may begin your public comment. Peggy, I show you were self-muted.
Does that work?
There you go.
Okay.
Yes.
I just want to say I appreciate the virtual meetings, and I absolutely love it. Hello, everyone. And I also really appreciate the vaccine clinics and everything that you guys have been doing for that. And the third thing I wanted to talk about, and I sent an email about it, was the unhoused and homeless people that are medically fragile, that are, well, they're in bad trouble at the park. You know, they're people that when you're older, you have trouble getting up off the ground, and when it's cold, your bones just don't work as well. When you're medically fragile, there was a little more than a week ago, a gentleman went to the hospital and from hypothermia, and he had plenty of warm clothes and blankets, but he couldn't get warm because his body was just too medically fragile to be outside in the cold like that. And there's a lot of medically fragile people there. There's a lot of wheelchairs and walkers in the park. And I think that we need to get the medically fragile people a place off the streets. And I don't know why we don't use the COVID quarantine place or something that just to get the, I mean, because they're dying. I mean, it's just a recipe for disaster. I mean, they're just dying. And it's seniors and disabled people that can't afford the rents that are out there. And because the rents have gone up dramatically, and it's been awful. Anyways, I sent an email about it, and thank you for all your hard work, and you have a good day. That's it.
Thank you for your public comment. At this time, I do show that as our last person wishing to give public comment. So I will return the meeting to you, Chair Bernie.
Thank you very much. And of course, thank you for everyone providing comment this morning at this meeting. After public comment, there's an opportunity for commissioners to respond or identify other issues or remonstrances they have. So is there any commissioner that would like to take this opportunity? I see none at this time. I would like to say, taking a moment away from the very strong substance of the remarks, several people mentioned they're from Ward 7 or Ward 4. You know, we're going to be looking at redistricting later. I don't know what city you're from. I presume you're talking about your city council wards. There are 5 county commissioner districts. So forgive my not knowing that. Since commissioners now have no responses, we are going to move one last time before we move on, commissioners. Okay. We're going to move to consent calendar. Is there a motion? Yes, Vice Chair Farr.
Thank you, Chair Bernie. I move the consent calendar of November 30th, 2021.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
Thank you very much. Approval of consent calendar for November 30th, 2021 has been moved by Vice Chair Farr, seconded by Commissioner Trieger. Is there discussion to the motion? Seeing none, all in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Let the record show that the consent calendar has been approved unanimously, 5 votes to 0. Thank you, Vice Chair Farr and Commissioner Trieger. We now are on an item that I'm very much looking forward to. Item 6, Human Resources. 6A, Order 21-11-30-06 in the matter of approving the tentative agreement between Lane County and the American Federation of State, County, and Municipal Employees, Local 2831 General Unit. And we have to present this item, Inga Woods, Labor Relations Manager, and Andrea Nagels, Assistant County Counsel. Ladies.
Good morning, Chair Burney and Commissioners. Thank you for having us. We are very happy to present to you today the tentative agreement that has been reached between the American Federation of State, Municipal, and County Employees, AFSCME General Unit, and the County for July 1st, 2021 to June 30th, 2024. We know there is limited time today, so we'll provide some highlights of the tentative agreement as a summary of the changes, and a full red line version of the contract can be found in the board packet. I do want to take the time to thank the members of the AFSCME bargaining teams, both general and nurses, President Larisse Rivera, Pat Dotson, Tad Larez, Lori Green, Candy Ellis, Charity Aguirre, Karen Blunden, Christine Yonkers, Robin Johnson, Tim Schinnebarger, Sean Gorda, and Jim Steiner. The parties have agreed to, retroactive to the first full pay period following July 1st, 2021, employees in 77 classifications will receive negotiated market adjustments. Employees receiving these market adjustments will be placed at the step closest in pay, which does not result in a decrease. These adjustments are the result of a comprehensive market study looking at the total compensation compared to the county comparators. All represented employees will receive a one-time payment of $1,300, a 2% cost of living adjustment for fiscal year 2021 to 2022, a 2% cost of living adjustment for fiscal year 2022 to 2023, a 2% cost of living adjustment for fiscal year 2023 to 2024. We reduced the 10-step wage scale to 9 steps by eliminating the first step. Employees on the current step 1 will move to the new step 1 retroactive to the first full pay period following July 1st, 2021. All employees hired on or after January 1st, 2022 will serve a 12-month probationary period. Employees will be able to utilize time management for vacation purposes during the probationary period. We have also added provisions for the county to contribute 1% of an employee's wage for those in regular positions to a deferred compensation account, retroactive to the first full pay period following July 1st, 2021. We have agreed to other various language changes in the agreement, which again are contained in the full red line version of the contract in the board packet. The total estimated additional cost for the compensation changes agreed to for the 3 years of the contract is $16,303,594. We want to thank the bargaining teams and leadership for all of the hard work in coming to this tentative agreement. We believe this agreement is in alignment with the county's strategic priority. Our people and partnerships provide a safe, healthy, and inclusive work environment that attracts and retains a diverse, highly skilled workforce with deeply embedded commitment to delivering value and service to the residents of Lane County through operational effectiveness, fiscal resilience, and partnerships. The AFSCME General Unit has voted to ratify the tentative agreement, and we are asking the board to approve that agreement today and direct county staff to implement those changes. And with that, Chair, we'd like to open it up for any questions from the board.
Thank you very much, Ms. Wood. Yes, I see Commissioner Farr's hand up right now.
Thank you, Chair Burney. And my question is a simple one. First off, a thank you for the tremendous amount, the many hours of hard work that went in by the folks that you named, and also by the staff that you're surrounded by. Inga, and I have a question, understanding this number changes probably every single day, and that you probably can't give me an accurate number, but approximately how many men and women are we're going to be discussing two different units today, the general unit and the nurses unit. How many men and women are included in those two units approximately? Understanding that number changes on a regular basis. Do you have that number handy?
I do not, Chair, have that number handy, but I can get it to you in one moment as we go through the other questions.
And that's fine. Later in, just pop it out when you find it, Chair Burney. That's the only question I have, and I'll wait for Inga's response later on in the meeting. But the point I wanted to make is that we have a vast number of men and women who are affected by the work that we're doing today, and their livelihood, their jobs, their families, and everything they do that ripples throughout the community hinges on the work that we're doing today. So Inga, to you, your staff, the folks in negotiations, Chair Burney, thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Vice Chair Farr. Inga, even though the Vice Chair said to just pop it out whenever you get it, if you would, you can just interrupt whatever we're saying and get that number to us. Are there any other commissioners that would like to make a statement, ask a question, have a comment? Yes. So, yes, Commissioner Buck.
Thank you, Chair. I don't have any questions, but a comment, which is it can't be overstated how much thanks and appreciation I have for Lane County employees who have gone through such phenomenal challenges this last over year, almost 2 years. Their commitment and dedication to Lane County and the members that live within the boundary of Lane County is just wonderful. The people feel it. They know what you're doing, and they know how hard you work. I thank you from the bottom of my heart. I know not just the people inside this particular union, but I want to recognize everybody in the ASME unit for their dedication, hard work. But this is for everybody involved. Our employees are just awesome people. And I know that you work hard, and I want to acknowledge that publicly today.
Thank you very much, Commissioner. Any other comments, questions?
I will just say, Chair, for due to the fast numbers from both Christine Moody and Kristen Mayfair, who are our numbers folks, 729 employees, Commissioner Farr, in the general unit and 102 in the nurses. And yes, the number changes every day.
Chair Burney, thank you, Ms. Wood.
Yes, Commissioner Trieger.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, everyone. I'll just echo Commissioner Buck's comments, but on the heels of that number of, well over 800 individuals, and of course, many of them with family members, I'm just so thrilled that we could come to an agreement that reflects the value of the work that's being performed by the people that we don't see on camera at our meetings each week, the people that are out there every day doing the frontline work for Lane County. And I'm also really particularly appreciative, as Commissioner Buck mentioned, of the extra effort that it's taken for folks to show up for work every day during the pandemic, whether that was because they had to juggle childcare impossibilities with school closures, work from home with the distraction and the extra divided attention of caring for children while working, or had to make other arrangements so they could get to work, for those that continued to show up every day and work in person because their duties required it. Just an extra measure of appreciation for all of you. And I'm prepared to make a motion when the time is right.
Well, I'll tell you what, in that, I want to make a comment, but we can always make comments to the motion. If you would like to make a motion, Commissioner Trieger, please feel free.
Okay, thank you, Chair. I move approval of order number 21-11-30-06 in the matter of approving the tentative agreement between Lane County and the American Federation of State, County, and Municipal Employees, Local 2831 General Unit.
Thank you, Commissioner Trieger. Is there a second?
I'll second.
I believe Commissioner Buck beat you to the pass, Vice Chair Farr.
I thought I delayed long enough, but I had not quite.
Order 21-11-30-06 in the matter of approving the tentative agreement between Lane County and the American Federation of State, County, and Municipal Employees, Local 2831 General Unit has been made by Commissioner Trieger, seconded by Commissioner Buck. Is there discussion to the motion? I see no hands, so I simply want to acknowledge, one, I want to thank Ms. Wood, Ms. Nagels, your staffs, everyone involved in this negotiation. I know that this has been long, and it's in the context of a very exhausting and overworked staff on every end of the spectrum. So thank you so much for keeping us informed. I also want to acknowledge that there's not going to be a strike this year. And, you know, that's a big deal. If I had my way, which I don't, and which I can't because our budget wouldn't support it, I would tie wages to inflation. And inflation right now is at 6%, and that's not inflation of real assets. We are seeing now, for example, home prices in Lane County increased by 20% in the last 12 months, which ripples through so many of the areas that we try and tend to, but these are also areas that the work of the county is done by this, largely by this AFSCME bargaining unit. So in the context of all of this, I also want to recognize the fact that this represents a big chunk of the Lane County workforce. We can sit up here and talk about policy all we want, but the actual implementation and service delivery on the ground occurs by the people that we have just developed this tentative agreement with. I'm delighted that this is working for both parties. I understand that this is going to require the county to look at budget areas even closely with this commitment. I think it's the right commitment, and I fully support this motion, and I fully thank our on-the-ground employees that are delivering services for our people and sacrificing much time with their own families in doing it under this kind of chaotic environment that we seem to be in. That's my only comment. Are there any other? Yes, Vice Chair Farr.
Chair Bernie, I should have checked with council prior to this, but I'm going to, out of prudence, make the statement anyway that I would like to declare a potential conflict of interest in that my son is a member of AFSCME General Unit 2831, and works as a mental health therapist. I do not perceive an actual conflict of interest, so I will participate in the vote.
Nor do we, unless he's renting a room from you. Sorry, I'm just kidding. Are there any other comments? I'm seeing none. I think, Commissioner Bozovich, I've been looking at you, but I don't mean to put you on the spot. Seeing no more comments, I'm going to call the motion. All those in favor of approving Order 21-11-30-06 in the matter of approving the agreement between Lane County and the American Federation of State, County, and Municipal Employees, Local 2831 General Unit, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Let the record show that Order 21-11-30-06, moved by Commissioner Trieger, seconded by Commissioner Buck, has been approved unanimously, 5 votes to 0. Thank you, commissioners. Thank you, AFSCME, Ms. Wood, Ms. Nagels, thank you. And I know you're here for our next item. Our next item is 6B, Order 21-11-30-07, in the matter of approving the tentative agreement between Lane County and the American Federation of State, County, and Municipal Employees, Local 2831 Nurses Unit. Andra?
Thank you, Chair Bernie and Commissioners. This will seem a bit like Groundhog's Day, very repetitive from the last item. We're very happy to present to you today the tentative agreement that has been reached between the American Federation of State, Municipal, and County Employees, AFSCME Nurses Unit, and the county for July 1st, 2021 to June 30th, 2024. Again, we will provide highlights of the tentative agreement as the full red line version of the contract can be found in the board packet. The parties have agreed to retroactive to the first full pay period following July 1st, 2021. Employees in 6 classifications will receive negotiated market adjustments. Employees receiving these market adjustments will be placed at the step closest to in pay, which does not result in a decrease. These adjustments are the result of a comprehensive market study looking at the total compensation compared to the county comparators. All represented employees will receive a one-time payment of $1,300, a 2% cost of living adjustment for fiscal year 2021 to 2022, a 2% cost of living adjustment for fiscal year 2022 to 2023, a 2% cost of living adjustment for fiscal year 2023 to 2024. We've reduced the 10-step wage scale to 9 steps by eliminating the first step. Employees on the current step 1 will move to the new step 1 retroactive to the first full pay period following July 1st, 2021. All employees hired on or after January 1st, 2022 will serve a 12-month probationary period. Added provisions for the county to contribute 1% of an employee's wage for those in regular positions to deferred compensation account, retroactive to the first full pay period following July 1st, 2021. We've agreed to other various language changes in the agreement, which again are contained in the full red line version of the contract in the board packet. The total estimated additional cost for compensation changes agreed to for the 3 years of the contract is $2,942,554. Again, we want to thank the bargaining teams and leadership for all of the hard work in coming to the tentative agreement. We believe this agreement is also in alignment with the county's strategic priority of attracting and retaining a diverse and highly skilled workforce. The AFSCME Nurses Unit has voted to ratify the tentative agreement, and we are asking the board to approve that agreement today and direct county staff to implement those changes. And with that, Chair, we would like to open it up for any questions from the board.
Thank you very much again, Ms. Wood. Are there any questions or comments from the board on this item? Seeing none, perhaps because commissioners don't also want to sound like Groundhog's Day, is there a motion? Yes, Commissioner Buck.
Oh, I got yours first. Okay. I'll move approval of order 21-11-30-07 as presented.
Is there a second?
A second.
Thank you very much, Commissioner. Commissioner Buck has moved and Commissioner Trieger has seconded approval of order 21-11-30-07 in the matter of approving the tentative agreement between Lane County and AFSCME Local 2831 Nurses Unit. Is there discussion to the motion? Yes, Commissioner Trieger.
Thank you, Chair. Just briefly, I want to add on top of all the comments I made on the previous item, they absolutely apply to this one as well, but particularly for folks working on the front lines in healthcare and this unit in particular, which is predominantly, if not exclusively, a woman-led workforce. I want to acknowledge the extra pressures and scrutiny that healthcare providers have been under and appreciate our nurses for doing that work that they do every day to care for the health of people in Lane County.
Thank you very much, Commissioner. Any other commissioners? Seeing none, at this time, I will call the question. All those in favor of approving order 21-11-30-07, moved by Commissioner Buck, seconded by Commissioner Trieger, please say aye.
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 Opposed? Let the record show that order 21-11-30-07 has been approved unanimously, 5 votes to 0. Thank you very much, Ms. Wood and Ms. Nichols. And thanks a lot for all your work on this. I mean, I can't even guess the hours involved. Thank you.
Thank you. It's a team effort. Thank you.
Absolutely. We are now on item 7. Public Works, 7A, Order 21-11-30-08, in the matter of setting a public hearing for the proposed surrender of portions of Rhododendron Drive and 4th Avenue, County Road number 65, to the city of Florence. And I believe we have Jay, I apologize, Blom, Blom, you correct me.
It's Blame.
Blame. Oh, okay. And by the way, my wife right now is at Target. We have Mr. Blame, Lane County Surveyor. Sir, if you would brief us on the subject.
Sure. Good morning, Commissioners. I'm here today in the matter of setting a date for a public hearing for the proposed surrender of Rhododendron Drive and 4th Avenue to the city of Florence. Florence has requested that Lane County surrender the roads that are located within the city limits of Florence. ORS 373.270 requires that a date for a public hearing be set to allow testimony to be entered into the public record prior to the board approving or denying the surrender. Our office would like to propose a date of January 4th, 2022 at 1:30 p.m. time certain for the public hearing. This date allows our office sufficient time to provide proper postings in the manner and timeframes as required by law. That concludes my presentation. If you have any questions, I would be happy to answer them.
Commissioners, any questions for Mr. Blame? Seeing none, is there a motion? Yes, Commissioner Buck. Although, Mr. Blome, I was prepared to tell you that this wasn't going to happen due to lack of a motion, but Commissioner Buck.
I'll move order 21-11-3-08 as presented.
Is there a second?
Second, Chair Bernie.
Thank you, Vice Chair. Order 21-11-30-08 in the matter of setting a public hearing for the proposed surrender of portions of Rhododendron Drive and 4th Avenue, County Road 65 to the city of Florence has been moved by Commissioner Buck, seconded by Vice Chair Farr. Is there discussion? Vice Chair, did I see your hand?
Just a quick clarifying question, Mr. Blame. It's stated as 4th Avenue in Florence. Is it 4th Avenue or is it 4th Street? And does that make a difference?
I would have to check on that. I think it's 4th Avenue is what was listed in our records.
Oh, then I withdraw my question. The map says 4th Street, but your records are more accurate than the map. I'm certain of that. Thank you.
Thank you for pointing that out. I'll make sure it gets corrected.
I was during this discussion watching the commissioner that represents that area who indicated, yes, it's 4th Avenue. Are there other questions or comments? Seeing none, all those in favor of Order 21-11-30-08, moved by Commissioner Buck, seconded by Commissioner Farr, please signify by saying aye.
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 Nay, opposed? Let the record show that Order 21-11-30-08 has been approved unanimously, 5 votes to 0. Thank you, Mr. Blome. We will see you January 4th, it sounds like.
Yes, thank you, Commissioners. Have a great day.
You too. Thank you, sir. Thank you, Commissioners. We are now on item 7B, first reading and setting the second reading and public hearing for ordinance number 2108 in the matter of amending Lane Chapter Code Chapter 10 to co-adopt amendments to the floodplain overlay district of the Springfield Development Code for the urbanizing area between the city limits and the urban growth boundary of the city of Springfield, and adopting a savings and severability clause. And we have to present this information to us, Rachel Surslov, Senior Planner. Ms. Surslov, if you're there. Ms. Jones, is Ms. Surslav with us?
I do not see her there on the meeting, which I can tell you this is just a first reading to set the second reading and public hearing for this meeting. I can try to get Rachel on, or we can just move ahead with a motion to do that.
Or Chair, if you want to move on to the next item and we can get Rachel on and you can come back to this item.
I think that makes sense. Is that Vice Chair Farr, does that work for you? Okay. Okay, commissioners, that's what we will do. So while waiting for Ms. Surslav, let's go to item 8, Health and Human Services. Assuming, well, 8A is a discussion. This is a 45, we've given 45 minutes to this. We would have given more had this agenda not been so chock full. So with that, a status update on progress with unhoused population initiatives. And we have with us Steve Manella, Human Services Manager, Kate Budd, Program Manager, Sarai Johnson, Joint Shelter and Housing Strategist, James Ewell, Program Services Specialist, and Brooke Freed, Eugene City Manager's Office Director, and Peter Chavanez, Homeless Policy Analyst. So I will let staff determine who is presenting and in what order, and we look forward to hearing from you.
Good morning, Chair Burney and Board of Commissioners. It's a pleasure to be with you this morning. I'm Steve Manella. I'm the Human Services Division Manager. This is my last day of regular county employment. Tomorrow I begin a journey into being a professional unclassified staff member of the county. But I'm looking forward to introduce you this morning to...
Mr. Manella, I'm going to interrupt you. How many years of service, sir?
42.
I think we're going to take a moment right now and as a group, thank you for your lack of curiosity for other work opportunities and your 42-year history with the county. Thank you very much, sir. And I'm sorry to interrupt the presentation.
And Chair Burney would darn well better take a heck of a lot more than a moment to acknowledge Steve Manella.
Well, I have a feeling it's going to occur several times. And you know what, Steve, I'm sorry, but with that interruption from Vice Chair Farr, if there are any other commissioners that would like to thank you, now let's just do that. What the heck? Yes, Commissioner Buck.
We can't not acknowledge this. I don't want to eat too much time into what we're here for today, but we can't not acknowledge 42 years of service with for somebody at the county. I know that we'll have celebrations here as you're an unclassified person and still, I feel still with us in the county for a little bit longer. But thank you for everything that you have done for this county over the decades.
Thank you, Commissioner Bush.
Any other commissioners? Yes, Commissioner Trieger.
Thank you, Chair. Again, I am looking forward to the opportunity to really take more time with more colleagues to celebrate and honor your incredible decades of service to this organization and to the work at Human Services Division, and just deep personal appreciation in this moment in a public meeting to offer that, and looking forward to a time to properly celebrate.
Thank you.
Yes, Vice Chair Farr.
Only one moment, Chair Burney, because much more to come. Steve, you know, during the long before I was a county commissioner, during the 10 years that I was a Eugene City Councilor, when I was a state rep, and all the times in between when I was the executive director of Food for Lane County, I continually sought your advice. And I hope those days are not over. And as long as I breathe, I will seek your advice. Thank you, Steve.
Thank you, Commissioner Farr.
And for the first comment from Commissioner Bozevich in this meeting. Yes, Commissioner Bozevich.
Yes, I'll just quickly say thank you, Steve, for your long service to our community. It's always been helping those folks that are most vulnerable in our community, and I can't tell you how much I appreciate that service and the work you've done.
Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Steve and everyone on the call, this was completely unrehearsed. Forgive us for taking the moment. Steve, I don't mean to embarrass you, but I have a real issue with the county, 42 years of service. I have a real issue with the county hiring people underage, which apparently was the case 42 years ago. And thank you. You've always, with diplomacy, handled my concerns and my issues and responded. I just want to take a moment and say that there was one of my constituents was killed in an auto accident on Lorraine Highway about a month ago. And he left a woman carrying his partner, carrying his child, and they had another young infant. And in a day, I called up Steve. Steve got staff in gear. That young woman and her infants are being supported by their church, by our county, by rent relief, by Food for Lane County, by a variety of programs. And I think that's just one of a billion examples of the impacts you've had. Now that we've eaten completely into your time, please continue with the presentation.
Okay, Chair Bernie, thank you all for your kind comments, and going to turn over the presentation to Sarai Johnson, and along the way, introduce you to Kate Budd, who's our newest staff member.
Thank you, Chair Bernie, commissioners. Thank you, Steve. Of course, today is our bi-monthly update to the board, and we are all grateful to be here with you today and thankful that you continue to exhibit great interest in this subject area, of course, and contribute your time to it. So today we're going to talk about a few different things. One, we'll give you an update about a benchmark we've reached with one of our partners, Built for Xero, quality data. We'll talk about families experiencing chronic homelessness. And then the City of Eugene will also share a little bit more about their safe sleep sites with Peter, Siobhan, and Brooke. I'm sorry I didn't put you on here, but it wasn't a jab, I promise. But first, I'll turn it back over to Steve right away.
So it's my pleasure this morning to introduce to you Kate Budd, who started yesterday. And Kate comes to us as our housing and homeless section manager and of the Human Services Division. And her previous job for a number of years was the executive director of the Council for Homelessness, which is the continuum of care in Vancouver, Washington, for Clark County, Washington. And we're just very pleased to have Kate on board and in a leadership position with her years of experience working on homelessness and anti-poverty programs. You'd like to say anything, Kate, this time?
Just good morning. I appreciate being welcomed on this meeting. Chair and commissioners, it's nice to meet you, and I look forward to working with all of you as we move forward. I recognize this is a continued challenge here in Lane County as across the entire West Coast, and just look forward to working collaboratively within the community to help address the needs of people who are unhoused.
Thank you, Kate, and thank you, Sarai.
Thank you both, and we're all thrilled that Kate is here and that this is her second day. So she's a veteran at this now.
Come on, Kate, get to work. Just kidding.
Only 41 years, 363 days to go.
Yeah.
All right, can you all see my screen again?
Yes.
Hey, all right. So introducing this quality by name list benchmark that we've just reached with Built for Zero, I wanted to give you all a quick reminder about what Built for Zero is, or introduce it to you for the first time if you haven't heard about it yet. But Built for Zero is a nationwide, and actually up into Canada and other countries now in a few cases, effort that has been led by a group called Community Solutions toward making homelessness rare, brief, and non-recurring, especially by starting with quality data and then using that data to drive decision making and focus on reducing different populations of people's experience of homelessness to zero. So Built for Zero is a thing that we've been a part of for quite some time, really from the early days of that collaborative problem solving model. So what they do is they kind of take what some of the problems are around handling homelessness, where we've set up our systems to try to manage homelessness, although not with great success, and shift it to a solution that's directed toward ending homelessness or making it rare, brief, and non-recurring, and that has measures that go along with it. So there's real solid actual data benchmarks for us to reach as we're also looking to reduce population's experience of homelessness to zero. So right now, homelessness is pretty diffuse. There are lots of different agencies. We have been increasing that collaboration between the city of Eugene and Lane County, of course, over the last several years. And we continue to bring in service providers into the mix to make sure that we're working with them more. And so there's some progress on this front, looking to define success in a different way, which in the case of Built for Zero, success is making sure that our number of people experiencing homelessness are below the benchmark. Then we have efforts currently driven by kind of static, well, not now, but because we have our homeless by name list. That's how it has been in the past, the PIT count, for instance. But now we do have this real-time individual level data on everybody in our community who's experiencing homelessness, so we can work with them as individuals and help them get into a place. So ultimately, Built for Zero is a way to look at this as a systems issue and as a way to work with individuals by matching resources with the people who need those resources. And so we have, the way that Built for Zero works is in three main phases. One is achieve equality by name list, which we have officially checked off our last few boxes for that. So we have a reliable, useful set of data that can help us to drive decision-making and focus. The next step is to reduce to zero, working population by population. So we're looking at specific groups of people, and then to sustain zero over time for each of those populations, which cumulatively, of course, ends up getting us to functional zero, meaning that anyone who becomes homeless or is experiencing homelessness has a place to sleep that night, on any given night. So I'm gonna go ahead and quickly just give you a little bit of sense about what it means to have quality by name list in place. We have full coverage, so all the agencies and programs are represented. We've been able to add a large number of providers to this over the last year as we expanded our number of service providers who are contracting with the county directly. So that has been a really positive thing. We also have person level data, so we can identify a person and see where they've been through the system historically and provide better pathways to exiting to housing for them. And then our reliability means that our data balance is month over month. So if you go and look at our homeless by name dashboard, which is available on Tableau, and it's a public facing webpage, you'll be able to see that the numbers month over month are checking out from the previous month. So we've got that under control, and we're also updating that list monthly, including the dashboard update. So everyone on that list, we're trying to move toward housing. That's our ideal outcome, of course, for each individual who's currently experiencing homelessness. And then this will look relatively familiar to you. This is what we've been calling inflow and outflow. But to respond to Chair Bernie's request to make sure that we are always thinking of the humans involved in the system, we'll call inflow entering. So people entering into the system, they're either newly identified, returned from housing, or returned from inactive. There's also our actively homeless population, which are people who are engaging with the system on that month or over a 3-month period. And then finally exits to housing, move to inactive, or no longer meet a population criteria. So they may be moved to a different group or otherwise. And I'm going to pass it now to James to talk about a really exciting benchmark that we've been able to meet here in Lane County over the last several months.
Thanks, Rai. Good morning, commissioners, and thanks for having me here. So yeah, excited to announce that between May and October of this year, we were able to reduce the number of families experiencing chronic homelessness in our county from 25 households down to 0. And we've been able to maintain that 0 over the last almost 2 months. Really the key to reaching that functional 0 mark for this subpopulation was utilizing many of the things that Sarai just mentioned and many of the principles that are outlined by the Built for Zero movement. One of those key components is what's called case conferencing, and that started with family service providers in late May, and it is bringing together of staff from those service providers as well as Lane County staff to quickly identify homeless families that have the highest vulnerability and determine how we can quickly wrap services around them and connect them to whatever housing resources are available at the time. And really through case conferencing, we've been able to move away from what was previously called referral buckets, where many households were likely to remain on our coordinated entry list for many months due to having a vulnerability assessment score that either put them too low to be prioritized for permanent supportive housing or too high to be eligible for the rapid rehousing list. And so through case conferencing, really we're able, when a housing opportunity is made available, the families that are determined to be the most vulnerable at that time get referred to that housing opportunity, regardless of where they are on the individual rapid rehousing and permanent supportive housing lists. Really, in addition to case conferencing, a key to this success was making focused resources available to these families. The addition of the Keystone Permanent Supportive Housing Complex, increased rapid housing program slots, and then the influx of emergency housing vouchers to our county really, directly resulted in our ability to reach functional 0 for this subpopulation. As with most things in our world, collaboration was also a big key to this success. And, several entities, including Lane County staff, local service providers, including St. Vincent de Paul, Shelter Care, Catholic Community Services, and Homes for Good, all came together to work on this goal. And really it was our involvement with Built for Zero, which allowed us to consult with other communities across the country and really look at best practices for reaching functional 0. So we're really hopeful that we can look forward to being able to implement some of these same strategies with other household types that are experiencing homelessness in our county and really move to a system-wide functional 0 for homeless households in our county. Thank you. That's all I got.
Thank you, James. And now we have Peter Chavan and Brooke Freed from City of Eugene to share some information about their safe sleep sites that they're working on at the city.
Sarai, good morning, commissioners. So I'm sure most of you are aware the city has been working for the past several months to stand up safe sleep sites to help stabilize people living outside. To date, the City Council has approved 5 locations and staff have been working with social service partners to develop operations contracts for things like intake, referral, site security, resident policies and procedures, and general site facilitation. The city is also developing these sites, so that would include things like ground preparation, individual and communal structures, making sure water, electricity, and sanitation are brought to the site. The city is proposing to invest $10.9 million of its initial $18 million ARPA allocation towards its Unhoused response, and approximately half of that will support safe sleep sites. So as I mentioned, there are 5 council-approved sites. The first site at 310 Garfield, which the city is leasing from LTD, opened on October 4th. It has a capacity for 55 vehicles and is being operated by St. Vincent de Paul. That site is currently full with an extensive waiting list. We know that sanctioned sites are few and far between in our community. And so it's not surprising that this filled almost immediately. We have 3 additional sites approved by council that we anticipate will come online by early 2022. The first one is Everyone Village at 1250 Bailey Hill across from Mattie Reynolds Park. That will be operated by Everyone Church on land leased to Everyone Church at no cost for 5 years by Arlen Rexia. So a nice public-private partnership in that location. That site will have capacity for 17 RVs and 15 structures. So those might be pallet shelters, they might be Conestoga huts. They haven't finalized what kind of structure they'll be using at that site just yet. A second site we're working on actively is what we're calling the Rosa Site at the corner of Bethel Drive and Roosevelt Boulevard, operated by Square One Villages on property that they own. That site will have a capacity for 40 structures, a combination of Conestoga huts and pallet shelters. And then the third site that we're actively working on is 410 Garfield, which will be operated by St. Vincent de Paul on a piece of property the city is leasing from a private entity. That site has capacity for 86 tents inside of a warehouse and a yet to be determined number of RV and pallet shelters on the outside. St. Vincent is exploring some new structures they may be testing, and that will affect our site plan for that location. So we're not sure exactly what's going to be happening outside of that building just yet. Council has also approved a small safe sleep site at Chase Commons Park. We're still engaging with the neighborhood related to that location and have not identified an operator for that site. And so that one is moving more slowly than the sites that I previously listed, where we have what we feel are the pieces to bring that to fruition. So by early in the new year, we're optimistic that we will add 140 alternative tent locations and 75 to 80 additional vehicle locations to the 100 additional alternative shelter beds the city stood up over the past year through our Rest Stop program. While the city of Eugene has moved rapidly over the past 18 months to add alternative shelter capacity to our community, we recognize the important collaborative work that remains to be done with our colleagues in Health and Human Services, as well as social service providers. If these alternative shelter locations are to fulfill their promise of providing a platform from which our unhoused neighbors can build toward a more stable life, they must be complemented with services that link residents therein more deeply to the broader homeless service system. City of Eugene staff have been working closely with Lane County's Human Service Division to ensure that our alternative shelters are integrated into the coordinated entry system, and understand that the Human Services Division continues to explore funding possibilities to add mental, and behavioral health support to these sites alongside system and housing navigation. The City of Eugene and Lane County also continue to collaborate on increasing outreach capacity in Eugene as a means towards building trusting relationships with people living outside. These relationships can ease the hesitancy many people residing in unsanctioned locations experience when invited to transition to available shelter and alternative shelter locations. One additional note I would like to raise is provider capacity, both in terms of safe sleep site operations and the continued scarcity of mental and behavioral health resources in our community. Shelter and alternative shelter operators consistently report that the level of need for mental and behavioral health services for their residents so far exceed their training and capacity, it impacts their ability to deliver the services for which they do have expertise. The city is also continuing to look for additional locations as well as explore with providers increasing capacity to operate sites. So that's what I have.
Thank you, Peter and James and Kate, Steve, and Brooke for being here. And now I'll turn it back over to you, Chair, for the rest of this session.
For the rest of this, thank you so much. Now the rest of this. No, thank you all very, very much for that report. I'm sure commissioners have questions, comments. Commissioners, yes, Vice Chair Farr.
Thank you, Chair Bernie. 45 minutes is far too short to discuss this in total, so we need to really hit some highlights, I do believe, and remind everyone that we do have a joint elected officials meeting coming up in December, where we'll discuss in further detail some of the things that we'll talk about today. Sarai and James and Peter and Brooke, I'd like to say this. There are two things that I really have been focusing on for a long, long time now. One is the collaboration, and the second is the measurement of success. And I think that I can report today that we have a greater level of collaboration between the cities and the county than we've ever seen. When I first became a city councilor last century, I wondered why the county and the city of Eugene didn't participate more in things together. We had the Human Services Commission, where we met once a month and then went away and then met again the next month. And that's when I first met Steve Manella, by the way. But there always seemed to be a gap between, in particular, then the city of Eugene and Lane County. I want to report, Sarai, that we are closing that gap every single day. I'm going to point to the work that you've done since you came on board to stitch that gap together. I'd like to point to the work that Peter Chavan has done. I'm going to apologize to you because when we set the agenda for this meeting last week, I insisted that you be invited as a participant. I am sorry for that, but I'm glad you're here. Chair Bernie, I'm only going to talk about one more thing very quickly. That collaboration is something that we do need to focus on, continue our work on, and not rest until there is no gap in between the coordination of services between the cities and the county. The second thing I'm going to talk about is something that we have discussed a little bit. We live in a world of anecdotes. We suffer from anecdotes, and we have a large group of business people in West Eugene who are continually giving anecdotes about what is happening in their business neighborhood, etc. And we take a great deal of time responding to the anecdotes. The greatest response that we need to provide is the measurement of what we are doing in order for them to be able to get on board with the things that we are doing, to give them a reason to trust the things that we are doing. I believe that if we look at our Tableau, the dashboard, which is on our Lane County website, you see a tremendous amount of data, a continually updated database of how we're addressing specific needs of homelessness, needs surrounding homelessness and poverty, and the progress that we're making. What I would like to focus on from this point forward is even more clear reporting on those successes. How can we chart it in a way that people can both respond to anecdotal inflammatory statements in many cases, and give the actual charts on what it is that we are doing. How many times, Chair Bernie, how many times have the people in this room heard, why are you not doing something about ... Well, the answer is we are. And Kate, you mentioned right off that we're not doing an adequate job of addressing the services. Nobody will disagree with that. We do need to do more, but we are doing a tremendous job in so many areas. And if we report it, then more people can understand how both their work, if you work for the county or the cities, is affecting the rate of homelessness. And second, how people who don't work for the cities can be a part of the solutions that we're putting forward. They're out there. This is not the time for me to go into any great depth. You mentioned every one village. We mentioned in particular, James, you mentioned a really wonderful number. We had 25 chronically homeless families, and now we have 0. How many people can disagree with the success of that? From 25 to 0. Now, 0 is not a bad number. Functional 0 is what we call it, but it's not a bad number. Chair Bernie, that's all I'm going to say, because there are lots of things we can say about the tremendous successes, but I believe we need to report it and continue in this collaboration between the cities and the county to do an ever better job of taking care of the people that are suffering from poverty and from homelessness and the manifested issues that surround that. That's all I'm going to say. If I raise my hand again, Chair Bernie, ignore me, please.
I have a witness. Thank you very much, Vice Chair. Yes, Commissioner Buck.
Thank you, Chair. First, I want to welcome Ms. Budd, to the team, thank you for coming on board here to Lane County and helping us out. I look forward to working with you in the future. I also want to play a little bit off of what Commissioner Farr's comments stated, because I agree. 45 minutes is simply not enough to get into depth on any particular subject at this level. And I very much appreciate having the joint meetings with the City of Eugene on this subject, but those are time limited and there's a lot of people with only a couple minutes. And again, it's not really a place where any one of us can really start giving in-depth analysis of, a particular aspect of this very huge octopus of an issue. So in the future, I'd love for us to dedicate more time on our board, at least, to this subject and maybe talk about a particular aspect of it and really get into the meat of it a little bit more. I also really appreciate the Built for Zero project and angle that we're taking. It was a big deal to get to that step number one, the homeless by name count. And yay, but there's so much more to do. And if the next step is really eliminate homelessness, then that's a pretty huge leap for our community. And we've got, a ways to go and we're doing great work along the way. But that's the part that the public really wants to see. That's the one where if they don't see it, they come to us and ask, what are you doing? Because that's the one that's the goal is, no homeless, and then sustaining that over time. And how do we get there? How does Built for Zero actually assist us to getting to that particular point? Do they have, steps in order to get there? If they do, what are they? How can we leverage that? I, in my heart of hearts, know that we really need a regional approach, which is, all encompassing of this collaboration aspect that we're talking about, but it's really also regional structured approach that we haven't completely moved into. And so I'm very curious what your thoughts are on that.
Thank you, Commissioner Buck, Chair Burney. I will also note that Kate, I believe, has been involved with Built for Zero in her previous role in Vancouver as well. So she might have some good things to add because I think they were a little bit further ahead in their Built for Zero work than we are, perhaps. So long story short, the way that Built for Zero works, kind of the main mechanism, in my opinion, is the choice of different subpopulations to focus on at any given time. So the work of reducing chronic family homelessness to zero and then sustaining that at zero is a big part of what we have to build in to our work. So that required specific case conferencing for families and all of the things that James mentioned that kind of came together all at the same time. So we had the emergency housing vouchers, prioritizing families, and we also had Keystone coming online, which is how I believe everyone got housed. And so that's kind of a part of the equation too. So we have a large kind of seemingly monolithic number of people on any given year experiencing homelessness here in Lane County, as you are all very well aware. That number coming in around 9,000 or a little over 9,000 each year pretty consistently is a lot. So taking, it's kind of Built for Zero helps us take one bite of the elephant at a time, if you will pardon that gross metaphor, that allows us to say, okay, we're working on families experiencing chronic homelessness, or perhaps we're working with adults over 65 with high medical needs to make sure that they can all get housed. So there's also ways for us to go after and receive and use different kinds of resources that are specific to a subpopulation that we haven't totally done before that way. And that's a place where I would say that your direction will be really crucial, because it's not necessarily that staff has the total ability to say, well, we're going to pick these people over here to work with. we want to make sure that we're approaching this as in an equitable way and that it's informed by the data. So what kinds of groups of people can we identify who kind of hang together, that then we can work in a really concerted way to leverage every resource we have for them toward helping them get housed. And that's one reason why Built for Xero typically recommends starting with chronically homeless veterans, because they do tend to have a different set of resources available to them that can all be leveraged if we are able to bring that collaboration really close together. So there's similar kinds of things for other groups, but veterans are one that certainly have resources that they can access that are really unique for veterans, and also have very specific barriers to housing that are somewhat unique to their population as well.
Commissioner Buck, I know that this is a subject near and dear. Do you want to get any more granular than that at this time?
Well, thank you, Chair. I would love to, but I know we don't have the time to do that. So I'll just allow other, commissioners to have questions. If we have time for second rounds, I'm sure I'll come up with things, but I know we got a busy meeting today.
Okay, I just wanted to give you that opportunity. Commissioner Trieger, did I see your hand up?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Thank you for the presentation as always. And I will just echo, not enough time. I will say I really appreciate Commissioner Farr talking about how we are doing a lot of good things and the community needs to hear more of what those things are so that they know how they can help us do more of those things, and also what we're learning from the things that are working well about who is not being served by those particular approaches, programs and projects. Which brings to the subpopulation, special populations approach that Built for Xero model brings us, which I'm very much in support of, just because we know it's working so well in other communities and because there are really very unique specific needs depending on the population, both in terms of addressing what the root causes are that create the circumstance for people to be unhoused and unsheltered, but also then to address the conditions that they're living in when they are unhoused and unsheltered. And we have to be thinking about, right, how are we going to turn that spigot off and address those root causes, which is a whole other conversation. But particularly, and I want to tag this back to the public comment that we received this morning with specific concern about elderly and medically fragile unhoused and unsheltered folks, and the need for a different approach. As much as I appreciate the Egan warming shelter is literally saving lives, I've been an Egan volunteer, the protocol for Egan is as much driven by the capacity of the program as it is the actual need and the actual dangerous conditions that people are met with on the street. And as the public commenter referenced, not everyone is impacted by the weather the same way. And so I'm really concerned that we're just not being fully honest about what people who are unhoused and unsheltered are facing in terms of the literally life-threatening conditions that they're under. Hypothermia happens at a much higher temperature than the temperature protocol for Egan if it's also damp. And we're just not addressing that. So this brings me to this issue of provider capacity, and it was raised in the presentation today that some of why more of the safe sleep spots aren't up and running yet. It's a number of reasons, but one is provider capacity and not having site operators, and the incredible level and degree and complexity of the need that people on the streets have around their behavioral and mental health, as well as medical conditions, let alone the fundamentals of wages and housing and so on. It's just so complex, so deep, so multifaceted. And it's a conversation we've been having on the Human Services Commission in particular around this issue of provider capacity, both in terms of wages and benefits so they can attract and retain good employees, but also the training and support they need as organizations to be able to deliver the services that we're asking them to do to serve this incredibly vulnerable population. So, again, in the interest of time, which we don't have enough, those are just some of the pieces that I'm especially concerned about and paying close attention to, is what are our criteria when it comes to hazardous weather, provider capacity, and then of course addressing root causes so we have fewer people becoming homeless and unsheltered in the first place. And I will just note, I'm very hopeful that at our strategic planning retreat tomorrow that the board is engaging in, we will spend some real time, some concerted time talking about what our role is and our commitment to working on this issue as part of our upcoming next 3-year strategic plan. And thank you again to all of the staff. Finally, I will say that I'm glad to see folks from City of Eugene here, and I want to echo Commissioner Buck's comments about the need to start considering a more regional approach that extends beyond City of Eugene and Lane County to include Springfield, the smaller cities, and particularly our rural communities, because we really have to fold in and integrate the response and address the needs countywide, and that requires a more expansive and expanded regional approach. So thank you everyone very much.
Thank you, Commissioner. Yes, Commissioner Bozievich.
Thank you. And I'll echo that I appreciate the call for a more regional approach. Having some conversations with some city officials, there's some concern that the lack of addressing this issue in some of the rural cities is causing some of the folks to move into the city of Eugene in particular. And we all, pay attention to the news and the stabbings at the Oregon Dunes National Recreation Area recently are a result of not dealing with that rural homeless issue. I have a, Built for Zero sounds great and all that stuff, but my experience with the PSCC and dealing with our population that's involved in the criminal justice system has led me to understand how important it is to have outcome measurements, to use evidence-based practices, and to really evaluate programs as to their effectiveness. And it's something we're required to do to access this funding for those particular programs dealing with the justice-involved adults in our system. I hope that part of Built for Zero has that built into it, because the one thing, we are giving out tens of millions of dollars in contracts annually from federal, state, and local resources to address this problem. And it just seems to be continuing to grow. And so, my constituents look at me and go, why does it keep getting worse? Even though we're spending all this money. So being able to look, to say we're evaluating these programs for effectiveness, we have outcome measurements, would be a really important thing for me to talk about with my constituents. So I hope that is part of this whole program. Finally, I'll just remind Sarai that I've made a data request quite a few months ago about origins of folks, and I hope someday to get some decent data on that, because I'm kind of curious, as this issue seems to be very West Coast centric in some ways. I have friends and family all over the country, and no one seems to have this problem like the West Coast does, and particularly 3 states on the West Coast. And I'm just wondering if our policies are causing a movement into the state and into Lane County, and I just don't have the data to reflect that. But I just hope that we can, as we move forward with this, make sure we've got outcomes that we are trying to achieve, and we are measuring those outcomes for the programs and evaluating, and then, doing what's right, not continuing to fund ineffective programs that don't move the needle. And in my final little bit of comment, I'll just say, I would love to see us concentrate on youth homelessness. I know we got a big grant for that, but I've always, since my first days as a commissioner, talked about the 15th night issue, because of my close relationship to the folks at Looking Glass. It's a small population that we could deal with that has long-term impacts on the homeless issue. We all know that if you can keep those kids off the street, they're less likely to be homeless, chronically homeless as adults. But if we let them stay on the street, they have more than 80% chance of being chronically homeless as adults. So it's cutting the pipeline off. So just another pitch for concentrating on those youth. That's why I'm really happy to hear about the families being dealt with and getting moved in, because that's part of those youth. So really thank you for the presentation. I look forward to getting the data in the future, and I look forward to continuing to work on this system.
I know we're low on time, Chair. Is it okay if I just quick respond to the data request?
No, it's not.
Okay.
I'm sorry. Yes, of course it is, Sarai, please.
Commissioner Bozovich, thank you so much for your comments. We have followed up on that request with Lisa Stewart and her team on the data. We don't collect that information right now, so it isn't something that we have in the homelessness management information system. It would require some additional study through a third party. And perhaps I do know that City of Eugene and also the Chamber of Commerce have been interested in finding out this information. So it is a conversation that continues happening that will just require some additional resource. And really quickly too, just back to Commissioner Trieger's comments, we are having a seasonal kickoff for the Hazardous Weather Task Force on December 13th. And that's a place where we've been doing a lot of conversation and planning around what are the kind of activation levels for different types of response. So whether it's sheltering or helping people shelter in place more safely. So that meeting will have some reveals, I guess, about that, and we'll be inviting more people to that. So anyone is welcome to attend. And if you're interested, that's being organized by Patience Winningham.
My turn. First, I want to acknowledge and respect the fact that each of you and many who are not on our screen in this meeting today are devoting your lives to helping those that are suffering, right? I mean, you're not doing this to get rich. You truly are delivering service and doing your best. So I want to thank you for that. I also want to say that in the mid-1960s, during President Johnson's administration, there was a thing called a war on poverty. And that war on poverty, it doesn't seem to have the attention or the headlines that it once did, but it is absolutely not over. And in fact, there are some who might say we lost that war. At that time, legislation created community action agencies, which, despite the fact that Lane County serves as that, was not intended to be a government function. Those were intended to be third-party nonprofits to build the capacity of communities to respond to certain issues of poverty, homelessness obviously being one of them. It was my opportunity to work within that Community Services Administration during the Carter administration. I won't get into that. That's just my story, but I just want you to know I resonate with your motives and your intentions for this work. You're dealing with structures we are dealing with structures that are completely out of balance and completely out of sync. And one of those, which is glaring, as I heard your report, has to do with, and I heard Commissioner Trieger say the Human Services Commission was discussing local nonprofit capacity wages. Well, they've been discussing that for several years. We've been discussing this, and you've been working your hearts out, and others, for years. The problem hasn't gotten less, it's gotten bigger. Even before there was data and computers and evidence-based this and that, the problem was less than it is now. So as we do everything we can, and by the way, I understand your work is confined by funding sources, which sometimes conflict and force you to put in different streams, different groups. Because of that, I'm gonna echo on all of my emails something Commissioner Bozovich said. because in all of my emails in the signature line, it quotes Frederick Douglass, it is easier to build strong children than to repair broken adults. Doesn't mean you give up on the broken adults, but the ultimate social impacts working with youth and families are greater as they accrue. So it's almost an impossible task. The one thing I would request as we look at, and I'm going to request at the next joint meeting so that you know, because this would free you up to, I think you're already, Sarai, you're working with Springfield already. All of you are doing what you can. You know this is a regional issue, but I'm going to request that Springfield participate with Eugene and Lane County at the table for these reports. And probably there's got to be a mechanism to bring other communities in also, right? Other communities that Lane County serves, because everything is connected with everything else. But here's something I would like you to consider. I've never mentioned this before. My oldest son would be a homeless veteran if his sister, my daughter, did not have him live with her and her family. And the role of family and neighbors helping neighbors is not something we spend money on in the public sector, but it's something that I think can be leveraged, because that's the ultimate infrastructure that we're having to support and recreate in some ways, which is neighbors and families and communities helping one another. So forgive me for the rambling thoughts. It's close to my heart. I know it's closer to your everyday lives. I agree that it's something we need to spend a ton of time on, but I also acknowledge you're already spending a ton of time on it, and I thank you so much for that. Are there any other comments at this time by commissioners? Are there any other parting thoughts, Mr. Manella, you or anyone in your group would like to give us as it relates to this item, which we will be working on and working on and working on?
I would just make a brief pitch that, you know, while we're dialing in on Built for Xero to the subpopulations that are impacted, that we need to keep our eyes on the bigger policies and housing, land use, behavioral health, the linkage between behavioral health, public safety, and homelessness, and some of the other items that you've talked about, because being without a home or a house is, you know, the most severe form of poverty. And then again, what I always remind folks is when we look at the historical one-night count data, that over time, you know, our numbers may stay about the same, but a lot of the folks who aren't chronically homeless are unstably housed. So how do we keep people in housing and keep them stable? And we know that in housing, they have a better opportunity to improve their lives. So I leave you with that.
Well, thank you. And my understanding is you're leaving us, but you're not leaving us. So
right.
Mr. Manella, Ms. Johnson, Ms. Budd, welcome. Mr. Ewell, Mr. Chavanez, forgive the pronunciation, Ms. Freed. Thank you all so much for your time. My understanding is that we now have for item 7B, which we skipped if you recall, the first reading and setting the second reading and public hearing on ordinance number 2108, which I read once but will now read again, in the matter of amending Lane Code Chapter 10 to co-adopt amendments to the floodplain overlay district of the Springfield boundary of the city of Springfield and adopting a savings and severability clause. I believe, is it Amber Bell that is now with us to discuss this?
Nope, this is Rachel Surslove. I'm on the line now.
Yay, Rachel. We're so glad You.
I apologize sincerely for my lateness, and thank you for accommodating a move on the agenda.
Not a problem. It's all yours.
Okay, thank you. So again, for the record, this is Rachel Sursliv, staff planner, and I'll be covering the amendments to the floodplain ordinance that the City of Springfield is pursuing. And this is a first reading for ordinance number 21-08, also identified as Land Management Division file number 509-PA21-05870. And this is a code amendment project initiated by the City of Springfield and the Land Management Division to amend the Springfield Development Code, specifically their floodplain overlay district. This proposal and this project is necessary pursuant to the Urban Transition Agreement made between Lane County and the city, which requires joint development and adoption of land use regulations within the City of Springfield urbanizing area. And amendments to the city's development code must be reviewed and co-adopted by the Board of Commissioners for the regulation of lands between the City of Springfield city limits and the City of Springfield urban growth boundary. These lands are subject to Land Code Chapter 10, and this proposal specifically requires amendments to Chapter 10, which regulate those urbanizing areas. On September 8th, 2021, a public hearing with the City of Springfield Planning Commission was held regarding this project. And on October 20th, the Planning Commission passed an order and a recommendation of approval for these amendments. And that recommendation has been forwarded to the City of Springfield City Council and the Board of County Commissioners. And this item before you today is a first reading and a request that the board set a second reading and public hearing for December 13th, 2021, time certain at 7 p.m. And at that time, city staff and county staff will be available to provide a more comprehensive report on the project. And there will be an opportunity for the public to comment on the proposal at that time. And that concludes my report, and I'm available for any questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Before we seek a motion, are there any questions for Ms. Sursliv? As the Springfield County Commissioner, I wish I could make this motion, but I cannot. I see Vice Chair Farr.
Thank you, Chair Bernie. In deference to your preference, I will make the motion. But pretend it's my voice, your voice coming out of my lips. Chair Bernie, I move the first reading and setting the second reading and public hearing on ordinance 21-08 in the matter of amending Lane Code Chapter 10 to co-adopt amendments to the floodplain overlay district of the Springfield Development Code for the urbanizing area between the city limits and urban growth boundary of the City of Springfield, and adopting a savings and severability clause, with a second reading and public hearing to be held on Monday, December 13th, 2021 at 7 p.m. with a time certain.
Thank you very much, Vice Chair. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Well, thank you very much. Tell you well, I'll second. Is there a discussion to the motion? Seeing none, it has been moved by Vice Chair Farr and seconded by Commissioner Buck to approve the first reading and set the second reading and public hearing on ordinance number 21-08. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed? Well, were I a ventriloquist, Vice Chair Farr, those would have been my words coming out of your mouth. But thank you very much. Let the record show that this motion made by Vice Chair Farr, seconded by Commissioner Buck, has been approved unanimously, 5 votes to 0. Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Sursliv.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Bergen. Charlie here.
That's, only you and I get, no, maybe. I believe that we now are on item 9, County Council. However, Council has informed me he has no announcements and is involved with depositions at this time. So Yes, Dr. Warren, it's good to see you again. We now are on item 10, County Administration. Report back, Public Health Advisory Committee on Polystyrene Food Service Containers. And we have with us Dr. Jocelyn Warren, Alex Kyler. So if you would provide a basis for discussing this item, we would be most appreciative.
Sure. Thank you, Chair Burney and commissioners. We are here to return the issue of the polystyrene ban, to put that before you as a reminder. In March, the Public Health Advisory Committee was asked to weigh in on a potential ban in polystyrene in Lane County. There already exists a ban, obviously, in Eugene and some other cities in Oregon, as was noted previously in the memo that the Public Health Advisory Committee produced. That memo was completed in June and then sent on to the commissioners. I believe that was in July or August, but nevertheless, the recommendations that the Public Health Advisory Committee made were based on their own review of polystyrene and potential health effects. And I know you've had a chance to review that, and so I won't go into that in too much detail. The recommendations themselves, though, were to, under the precautionary principle, which they laid out in their memo, that there is some level of risk incurred by polystyrene use, and they therefore thought it was prudent to explore options to minimize exposure in Lane County. They did not weigh in on any financial or economic impact, but they thought that, given if depending on that weighing of costs and benefits, they thought that minimizing again the risk is important given the potential negative health consequences, and that minimizing also polystyrenes could have a positive impact on the local environment by reducing the burden in landfills and the impacts on the environment. So all that said, those recommendations were made and passed on. And in the meantime, Senate Bill 582 was signed by the governor into law, and that was in August. And that provides a framework for the use of many single-use items, including polystyrene, under something called the Producer Responsibility Organization. And Alex Kyler is here to describe that as well, because that also has an impact potentially on polystyrenes. So in the interest of having full information about what the picture looks like, Alex thought it was important to bring this information to you.
And I'll just pick up here, Mr. Chair, if that's okay with you.
Absolutely.
So I'm Alex Kyler. I'm Lane County's Intergovernmental Relations Manager. Just to recap, I was with solid waste staff from Public Works before you back in March of this year when this issue really first arose. And at that point in time, I reported out on legislative efforts to create a product stewardship framework in Oregon. There were a number of competing bills. There were a number of competing sort of visions for what that would look like. And I did describe those to the board, but also with the caveat that nothing had reached the governor's desk, and there was a long way to go yet in the 2021 session of the legislature. So the report back from my perspective is that indeed the legislature did work this issue extensively. This was a session-long piece of work, Senate Bill 582, that did reach the governor's desk, and she did sign it into law. And it indeed does create a product stewardship framework for what are called covered products in Oregon. And I've included Senate Bill 582 in your packet, so you do see it. And just to briefly touch on I think what are pertinent to polystyrene foam is that the focus of this, the impetus for this measure really was a number of things. One is that, one of which is that the single stream recycling system in Oregon has really been plagued by contamination. things that are non-recyclable, making it into that stream. And while machinery is, just come leaps and bounds in terms of trying to manage contamination, there are still some real problematic materials. Clamshell containers being one of them. They're not. They're often contaminated by food, so that poses a challenge for recycling. They're very lightweight. They tear easily, that sort of thing, and so they really sort of fly around a lot in some of this processing equipment, and become ultimately a contaminant in what are otherwise designed to be very clean streams of recyclable materials. So Senate Bill 582 did focus on creating a framework to address these contaminants. And on page 2 of the bill, for example, it really does define what a covered product is, and it includes food serviceware. Food serviceware is then defined on page 3 to include things like clamshells and straws, similar containers to clamshells, cups, bowls, pizza boxes, plastic plates, those kinds of things that quite often are made out of polystyrene. As Jocelyn indicated, the bill does stand up a producer responsibility organization or organizations. That's on page 4 of the bill. It defines what a producer responsibility program is. That's the framework that would be developed to address how to essentially minimize the use of some of these containers. And section 6 of the bill does talk about a program plan. Each stewardship organization must make a program plan. That has to be accomplished by March 1st of 2024. So it's got a bit of a flight plan to be implemented, but I heard in public testimony this morning, 10 years, for example. I don't necessarily agree with that it would take that long to stand this up. The other pertinent sections of the bill that I think are important for the board to know is section 11, which talks about the membership fees, and that's really what funds the whole program. And there's another really interesting section in section 33, because one of the things that the membership fees are based on is a life cycle analysis of a particular product. And life cycle analyses typically are cradle to grave kinds of analyses. And so things like public health impacts should be included in that life cycle analysis, which is then becomes a component of setting a fee for the particular manufacturer of the material that's addressed. Ultimately, I believe that polystyrene foam and clamshell containers won't do well in that product stewardship framework. And so I think what this does is set up a framework that was desperately needed in the state of Oregon, that is statewide, and that will result in the outcomes that the Public Health Advisory Committee actually seeks, the minimization of these kinds of materials. And I think that was what product stewardship was always designed to do, and in fact, what it has done by being signed into law by Governor Brown. So really, where I think we land here for the board's consideration is you really have a policy question in front of you about how to proceed with an ordinance that could ban this material, and the memo describes a little bit about what could be in such an ordinance. You'd probably want to define the material, make sure that you're addressing what entities are banned from using it, and probably speak about an enforcement mechanism. At least that's how the city of Eugene addressed their ordinance in their Eugene code. We have done some things where a county ordinance can be done county-wide. I think the assignment on this one was to not pursue that effort, but to make it more traditional, and that would only take place in unincorporated Lane County. The memo does sort of try to outline some of this policy questions that the board, I think, is presented with, however. And that is, every time you assign work something goes by the wayside. There's only so much capacity inside the organization. In particular, when we are thinking about sort of very large public health issues of the day and very large solid waste questions of the day, one of the things that has come to the front was brought to light through your climate action plan, and that is that the Short Mountain landfill is a significant emitter of methane gas. That comes from organic material that decomposes in the absence of oxygen in the landfill. There are strategies that you will soon hear about how to better manage those systems to create a mitigation effect for greenhouse gas. And so what I think the board really does have here is sort of a dial that it could turn that could ban polystyrene foam from the landfill, or a lever that it could pull to really take on the greater issue of how to better manage organics in the waste stream, a much larger component of the landfill and a very significant source of the greenhouse gas. So, you know, that's the kind of sort of weighing of this issue that I think the board has in front of it. And I think I'll stop there and just say, you know, obviously staff will do whichever direction you choose to undertake today. An ordinance is not out of the question. It certainly can be done. The climate action plan will continue to move forward. And you will hear a lot more about some of the work about organics in the waste stream. I think next week you've got a couple items actually that deal, one with the climate action plan and two with some of the technologies that the solid waste program is looking at implementing down at Short Mountain Landfill. So unless you want to hear anything more from me, I'll await any questions that you have. Thank you.
Before I open this up for questions, Dr. Warren, did you want to state anything? Because I'm hearing two kind of different things. I'm hearing public health and I'm hearing climate. And anything you want to clarify before the board asks questions?
I would be happy. Thank you, Chair Bernie. I think the public health aspects of this that we were asked to weigh in on particularly were about the health aspects. We do not at this point have the expertise in climate change or adaptation or climate justice to really weigh in on this issue. That's going to change very shortly, because with public health modernization and funding coming to our department, we will be expanding our environmental health section really significantly in scope to include work in climate justice and mitigation, especially with vulnerable communities. And I really look forward to that work, and that will be coming. We'll be presenting more on that in the next few months. But at this time, I think in terms of the health effects, what the Public Health Advisory Committee was able to produce in terms of the research that's available was very comprehensive and well done. So I think it is a question of, and I appreciate that Alex brings up the point of capacity within our teams during this time, especially with the pandemic continuing, as we all know. And so I'm also want to apologize that this has taken so long to return to the board for consideration. It has been something that the Public Health Advisory Committee did some time ago. But I would say that for us, we're really limited to the summary of the health effects for this particular issue. Thanks.
No, thank you. And Vice Chair Farr, I did see your hand up. I apologize.
Thank you, Chair Bernie. Just a quick comment. This is a very thorough and interesting report. I wanted to mention just a kind of a semi-hemi-demi correction regarding history and timing on this. Mr. Kiley have stated that we first addressed it during our March 2nd, 2021 meeting, and that also is restated in the board packet today. Really, the discussion on this began in no small part in my office when I was chair last in 2017. And I think Mr. Kreider, who testified this morning, as well as maybe Mr. New, most likely Ms. Kaplan and Ms. Medley, remember the discussions that we had at that time. And we didn't punt the ball, we just put it out for further research. And that is what we're hearing today, is the further research that you're providing, that staff is providing, both health and public works is providing, regarding health implications and climate implications. Chair Bernie, I'm going to listen to more discussion. I was one of the early instigators of this, the direction we're going with this. I'm looking forward to hearing what other commissioners have to say. Thank you.
Thank you. Other commissioners? Yes, Commissioner Buck.
This question, I believe, is for Alex, which is on the timeline of Senate Bill 582 and its implementation. I think I heard you say some people thought it could take up to 10 years to apply it fully. I'm fairly certain advocates for, a polystyrene ban would not be willing to wait 10 years to do something about this issue. I'm hoping that there is parts of this that will come on board quicker than others, and I'm not sure this particular subject will be one of those. But can you describe, with as much knowledge as you know that's out there to the public, a little bit more about the timeline implementation?
Sure. Chair Bernie and Commissioner Buck, the bill, I did read in the bill this morning, and I think it's in section 6, but I'm not sure. But at any rate, the producer responsibility organization must submit a plan to the DEQ that addresses a range of issues, and that plan has to be submitted to the DEQ by March 1st, 2024. The way I understand it is that the DEQ then will undertake a review of the proposal and ultimately has to provide approval of the plan. And my understanding is that approval cannot come later than April 1st, 2027. So it is the case where there is some time that will pass before this is fully implemented. But particularly given the focus on covered products and food service ware, there's no question in my mind that that the kinds of containers that we're talking about, I heard referred to as restaurant polystyrene this morning. I mean, they're a focal point of what will be in that plan. So whether it's 2 years from now or 5 years from now, there is a timeline established that gets this going, and it will be reviewed annually thereafter. And particularly, I think the fee structure will be probably one of the most difficult things to sort of get right, if you will. But that's why I wanted to point out the issue about the life cycle analysis. And I will say, and I was not aware, Commissioner Farr, about the earlier discussions. This is not the first time that the legislature took up product stewardship. They've tried for a number of years. And interestingly, sometimes when the legislature fails to act on something or get a bill done, there's an awful lot of discussion about, well, should local governments do something to put additional pressure on the legislature? Menu labeling for calories was a great example of that, where proponents really wanted Lane County to do something in order to force the legislature to create a statewide framework. In the case that you're examining right now, the state already acted, and you're sort of now suggesting, well, let's ban that material after the fact. So I would, if we had, and believe me, there were discussions about, would Lane County stand up a product stewardship ordinance prior to the state taking action on something in order to sort of grease the skids for future conversations and action by the legislature? To my knowledge, none of the local governments ever did that kind of work, but a product ban could have been seen as part of that. So I think from my perspective as a legislative analyst, I sort of question the timing of what the board is asking staff to do here, in that the statewide framework, which I think is really what will move the dial. I think I indicated in the packet, Maine also passed a similar framework that is also being implemented. You know, my sense is that there's a number of national folks who, I know there's a national product stewardship organization, you know, that will continue to look at what's happening in Maine and Oregon and try to expand it into other parts of the nation. And really what you want, if you're really going to move the needle on an industry, is you need sort of a national framework. And I think what Oregon did as a state was a huge step in that direction.
Commissioner Buck, did you have any follow-up to that?
I had one other question, which is for Dr. Warren, and that was, you had mentioned that in the modernization process that you're doing, that we'll be getting somebody who will be more, I guess, a focus of their job description in environmental and climate related health issues, and that we'll be hearing about that in about 3 months. What do you see the timeline being for that kind of position and I don't want to, do your presentation now, but just quickly, what is your timeline for that particular position, and what generally do you think that position will be working on, other than the main category?
Chair Burney, Commissioner Buck, thank you. I always love an opportunity to talk about public health modernization. So thank you for the question. We do have the funding for that now. It has been awarded. The legislature, as you know, made a very significant investment in public health modernization in this past biennium. It was $60 million in total. Half of that, $30 million, goes to local public health. And so the Lane County the Lane County portion is combined also with the CDC funding for workforce development, amounted to about $2.1 million for the biennium. So we have the funding in hand. We are putting together the hiring packet that we'll need. The person, well, there will be at least 2 people that will be involved in this work, actually 3 in total. 2 in the climate program. There will be a coordinator and a lead, and then also a policy lead for that will be responsible for working with communities around policy development that may support recovery from COVID, as well as climate resiliency. The other position will be a senior health analyst that is supporting the work as well. We've found that having one person responsible for a program is not very efficient or effective and doesn't make much of an impact. So that will be a team. The other piece of the expansion on the scope of environmental health will be around the built environment and that impact on health locally, which is a really exciting opportunity for us. It's not a new concept by any stretch of the imagination, and what work that we have done previously in the prevention section, but with no real dedicated or ongoing funding. So there will be a policy position as well dedicated to the built environment that is able to connect more around land use and transportation and bring that public health and health lens and health equity lens to the work as well. So, we've had some difficulty in hiring senior positions recently in public health that are not related to the COVID response. I don't know exactly what that is about. I think there are those challenges in all industries, but we will be advertising for that, I would think, near the beginning of the year, hope to hire in February or early March.
Other commissioners? Commissioner Bozovich.
So I just want to say that I support staff's recommendations around this issue, basically to not move ahead with an ordinance and to look at our issues around methane emissions from the landfill. I believe we can address a lot of this just through education and consumer choice, similar to the way BPA was addressed in use for water bottles and hardening of plastics, and consumers demanded the removal of that product, and it disappeared for most of those products. Just as in opposition to some of our public comment today, I support us continuing to have vaccine clinics because I believe the parents can make an educated choice whether to vaccinate their children or not, and it's their choice. But I will just note that, a ban would have perfect timing, Louis. Hey, sorry.
I'd rather hear Louis than you, Commissioner.
Yeah. I'm sorry. But there are some unintended consequences about bans and all that. Currently, right now, there are some severe supply chain issues about getting substitutes for EPS ware in restaurants. In fact, if folks that went on the jail tour recently that the board took realized that our food service there had to use them because they couldn't get paper replacements for them at the time. And that's going to continue to be an issue for a while, that whole supply chain issue. In addition, as we look at methane emissions from the landfill, we've had past testimony from Mr. Hurley that paper products actually generate methane. EPS does not out of the landfill. So there will be, if we don't have a diversion program for those products where they get composted and the methane's captured otherwise, we will actually be causing an issue for additional methane generation out of the landfill. So I think it's wise that we let the state, program, come to fruition. I think that'll have a lot of positive impact, the product stewardship. And I think that at this time, we should just concentrate on trying to do our best to eliminate methane emissions from the landfill. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Any other commissioners? Yes, Commissioner Trieger.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for the presentation, Dr. Warren and Mr. Kyler. As usual, I have a sort of combination of some comments and some questions. And thank you, Mr. Kyler, for bringing up the work in 2008 around menu labeling as one of the proponents that you mentioned at the time of that as an important consumer information disclosure and public health measure, which not only did it make it to the state level, but actually became embedded in the ACA, in fact. And I think as much as people were resistant to it then, now we sort of take for granted that we show up at a Starbucks or a McDonald's and get to see the calorie counts of our menu items. So there's that. I wonder first, Mr. Kyler, if you could, for the benefit of folks watching, talk not only, you gave us a timeline for the product stewardship bill, but even if we were to direct staff to craft an ordinance, the process for that isn't quick either. There would be a fairly long on-ramp to that. It wouldn't be something that we could just make happen and say suddenly next week, these products have been banned in Lane County. And so just for the benefit of folks, because I certainly didn't understand this as well early on, how long it actually takes to draft an ordinance, have the hearings, and then the implementation. Of course, we'd want to give a good on-ramp for folks to spend down inventory and so on. Just as a quick comparator, your best guess as to what an actual change on the ground in the community would look like if we were to pass an ordinance, how long that might take.
Sure. Chair Bernie, Commissioner Trieger, even today, you did first readings. You're going to do a second reading this afternoon. These are ordinance processes. Each ordinance requires a minimum of 2 readings. Often you'll, on sort of some of the more complicated land use issues, you could get into 7, 8 readings of an ordinance. Each of those takes material to be developed for the Board of County Commissioners by staff. In particular, an ordinance is crafted by County Council, and the the sort of in the weeds is that there has to be at least 2 weeks between a first and second reading. And as you indicate in this, you might want to say, well, the ordinance will take effect at some date specific in the future to give time for inventories to be used up and for alternate plans to be made for replacing those kinds of materials. So, you know, it's really at the direction of the Board of County Commissioners. I think to answer your question, you know, some period of time, probably between 3 months and a year, I would say, depending again on how much debate there is over an ordinance. You know, so thus far you've really heard a lot from proponents. I think if you were to actually put a draft ordinance out there, you might hear more from the restaurant community and the folks who represent restaurants in the state of Oregon. They may come and ask for various changes to an ordinance. So it really does depend on what sort of direction you all give, particularly with response to a start date. And then the question of, you know, enforcement and who would do that is another sort of complicating factor. Do you want to just go ahead and say this is against the law in rural Lane County now, or do you actually want to have you know, some sort of enforcement team that's out there making sure that people comply with that law, that local law? So there are a lot of questions that would need to be answered, but I think to answer your question, probably three months to a year.
Thank you for that. And just to be clear from my personal perspective, if we were to pursue such a thing, for me, we would be doing it because of the public health impacts of polystyrene and food service, particularly on children and developing bodies as an endocrine disruptor. And so I would actually be wanting to do it as a public health, Board of Public Health, and it would therefore apply to the cities within Lane County, which would probably extend that timeline that you just mentioned for those reasons. My assumption is that the product responsibility organizations, what the fees would do would be to help close the gap that right now a lot of restaurateurs aren't using alternate products because of the cost gap, the price gap, as you mentioned in your memo. And so that these product responsibility organizations and the fees associated will help close that gap in cost between polystyrene and less toxic alternatives. Is that, and therefore result in fewer restaurants using the polystyrene. Is that accurate?
Chair Bernie, Commissioner Trieger, I think that's accurate. I mean, oftentimes people talk about external costs being, you know, internalized. And so what this does is it really does try to sort of do that, particularly, like I said, the life cycle analysis. Now, I will say the product stewardship organizations will fund a great deal of systems within Oregon. Under Senate Bill 582, you'll see there's actually a payment structure that will go to local governments, because we're responsible for standing up these collection programs and systems. And so there will be some funding that comes to us out of Senate Bill 582. There's requirements for educational and campaign kinds of programming that the product stewardship organization will frame up and implement. So they've got a lot of, these are very large fiscal organizations once they're really stood up, and they do have to pay for a lot in the state of Oregon, and so somebody's going to bear those costs, and the costs, like I said, will be attributed to packaging producers depending on what kind of packaging they're marketing in the state. So yeah, it really, like I said, I think what ultimately this law will do is get the outcomes that the Public Health Advisory Committee sort of recommended or expected that a ban would undertake. It would minimize the use of this particular kind of material. Maybe not at the timeline that they'd appreciate, but I really do believe that ultimately this product stewardship framework will change sort of the way that we consume items in a takeout world, if you will.
Great, thank you for that. And I will just say, I appreciate that, but I just can't not point out that when we talk about the cost burden on the, you know, in this case, restaurants, we're really just cost shifting every time we do anything. Right now, there is a cost to people consuming products that are packaged in EPS. It's just the cost is to the health to the consumer as opposed to the purchasing of supplies of the restaurateur. So I am curious about, so sort of a two-part as my last thing, and then I'm going to wrap up by appreciating the work of the Public Health Committee in a minute. But in your memo, you, I think you asked maybe for, or recommended that that there be a request to have staff come back and talk about recommendations and a presentation on mitigating emissions at Short Mountain. So if we need that later as a head nod thing, I'm happy to do that. I'd love to hear that. But as we've been talking about here, there's both the impact on the environment and the impact on human health of these products. So I would also very much like to hear at some point from staff on other ways we can minimize exposure, as the recommendation says, short of this ban, presuming that the product stewardship bill is going to achieve those goals for us. What in our own purchasing practices could we be doing as Lane County events that we host, and so on, to minimize exposure to these products? I would very much like to hear that at a future time. And so with that, as I said, I will wrap up my comments with a great appreciation to our Public Health Advisory Committee for their deep work and research and thoughtfulness on this really important topic.
Thank you, Commissioner. Are there any other comments by commissioners? I noticed, I have a couple of comments. One, a comment on education. In 1988, as part of the strike that the Teamsters had with the food processing industry in Watsonville, we came up with the idea of country of origin labeling of agricultural products. That was supported by labor. It was supported by management. We did it. The Teamsters actually, through their networks, went through the feds and got that approved. And it did not, as we had hoped, change the buying habits of the American public at that time. Ironically, about a decade later, a guy named Lou Dobbs decided that was just the greatest thing since sliced bread, and made a big issue. And then that, in a different era, was effective. As it relates to this, ultimately, it's going to be the purchasing habits of an enlightened electorate that will force markets to respond. As we look at a concept which I first heard from Good Company called the life cycle of a product, one, we ought to have on our phones an app that shows the life cycle of any product, and that life cycle ought to include how economies in other countries are organized to produce these consumer durables for us, i.e. material used for batteries as we move into more electric cars, and where that material comes from, and how various tribes in the country it's found in are now reorganizing, and it's not a good thing. As it relates to this, personally, I believe that polystyrene should be banned globally. Personally, I think it will be, and we're going to move in that direction. Personally, there are a lot of other items that you look at that we're going to have to rethink economically. Tactically, it seems like almost the worst time to be talking about that now, given the condition of our restaurant community, what they're grappling with and dealing with just to stay alive with COVID, how a changing workforce is changing the ability of restaurants to even maintain a workforce. I think timing might be bad for this now. I think that it might be more impactful, Alex and Dr. Warren, as I heard you, it might be more impactful to consider a resolution asking the state to increase its time frame for implementation of that legislation you discussed. I could see that. I also don't know, as I hear from the sheriff's office, of under capacity, how do we enforce that? I think we have to look at the costs to the county of what enforcement would or wouldn't look like. I don't have the answer to that question. I'm just saying it brings it up, right? So in terms of timing, in terms of impact, understanding environmentally, personally where I am, I'm wondering, and also I disagree that this is a binary choice. It's not, do we move on this versus other climate issues, or do we move on this versus other public health issues? I'm glad we're going to look at policy things, as Dr. Warren mentioned, and then what that actually means. So for all my gabbing, and I apologize, you can see I'm a bit I need to understand, is this the right time? One, is this the right place versus pushing the state to move faster on implementation? And finally, why did you recommend the Board of Commissioners not pursue an ordinance at this time?
I could take a stab at that, if Chair Bernie. I think you're spot on. You're going to receive more information, I believe, next week on both the Climate Action Plan and what the Solid Waste Program under Public Works is doing with respect to trying to manage methane emissions at the landfill. That's a piece of, I think, what you're asking for is more information so you can sort of make a decision about how to move forward, how the county moves forward with respect to this and other kinds of issues. I think Dr. Warren and myself both brought up that, climate policy is something that is large and looming, and to me, it's a huge both public health and environmental issue. We have a role to play in mitigating climate change, and one of the issues that's already been identified in the Climate Action Plan and in the internal inventory was the performance of the landfill. So you'll be getting additional information about that question next week. Hopefully it'll help you sort of answer some of these questions. Whether we can, do both, I think, is another question. I mean, one of the things that I think you've heard me say today, and I think you've heard the administrator talk about in the past, is, we have an organization that does have capacity issues, and it is something that, when I was presenting to you, obviously I brought up just to discuss sort of where, in terms of bang for the buck, that's your job, is to sort of figure out, hey, what is the best bang for our buck within the organization, in which direction we take it. So I think I'd just leave that with you guys to contemplate about how you want to move forward and where you apply the staff resources to make those kinds of changes.
I see, understanding our time constraints today, I do see Commissioner Trieger's hand up again, but if we could be succinct or only speak to things we haven't spoken of yet, please.
Yep. Thank you, Chair. It is exactly something we haven't spoken to yet. And I just want to say, particularly for the public watching, when we get into these discussions about enforcement and capacity, this would not be a law enforcement issue. This is not something that we have to worry about sheriff's capacity. It wouldn't be sheriffs that would be called out for such a compliance problem. There are various regulatory licensing and monitoring entities, and this goes to the public health modernization work and the expansion of what our environmental health workers might be able to do and monitor and advise and support local businesses in complying with a law. It's not a law enforcement issue. When we talk about enforcement capacity, we're not just talking about law enforcement. We still have the capacity constraints and issues, but over time we will build that. That's exactly what modernization is going to do for us. Much like when a restaurant isn't, their refrigerators aren't cold enough for good food safety. It's not something you call the municipal police department or the sheriff about. So I just want to make that really clear so that we don't get bogged down when we talk about enforcement capacity, that we're not talking about law enforcement.
Thank you, Commissioner, and thank you for the correction, because I did imply that. Thank you. Any other commissioners? This is a report back. What is necessary from us at this time?
Chair Bernie, I think we were looking for direction about what steps to take next. What I heard is that there's interest in learning about how we can minimize exposure to polystyrenes as a county organization, short of an outright ban, and we can certainly look into that and bring that back to the group.
Well, I think
do you have
additional? I heard also that it makes sense to punt a few weeks until we hear this other discussion you've been referencing several times about short mountain and opportunities to mitigate methane. Is that correct too?
Yes, that's correct.
I'd say that's accurate. Yeah.
Commissioners, my sense is that we're going to need a report back. We don't have a date certain. Yes, Commissioner Farr.
Thanks, Chair Bernie. I will note that we have 2.5 hours on next week's agenda scheduled for discussion surrounding both climate change and landfill issues. So I believe that this will be, while this is not moving forward as an ordinance, it's certainly not going on to any back burner.
Oh, 1000% agreed. Do commissioners agree with that? Okay. Dr. Warren, Mr. Kyler, it's a front burner issue for us, not a back burner issue for us. We're going to be addressing the context for this next week. So we will be in close touch and move forward and see what we want to consider. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. That does. Thank you very much.
Does that make sense to you, or am I not capturing? Okay. Thank you very much.
Okay. Thank you.
It's 11:45. We probably have about 15 minutes more of a morning agenda. Does anyone want to take a break, or would you like to just move through it right now? See, I'm in the minority, but I can wait another little bit of time. Okay, we are now on item 11, I believe, Human Resources, 11A, Order 21-11-30-09, in the matter of updating County Council's employment agreement. We have Alana Holmes, Chief Human Resources Officer, to provide a brief report for this item.
Thank you, Chair Bernie, Commissioners. With me today virtually, kind of in the virtual background, is Missy Metella, our outside counsel, and Christine Moody, the Budget and Financial Planning Manager, both who assisted and provided support in this process, just so you know. We are here in regard to County Council Steve Dingle's employment agreement. In order to allow both parties time to review and consider options associated with County Council's 2022 employment agreement, staff had recommended 2 amendments to the current agreement that together extended the notice of non-renewal timeline in the current 2021 employment agreement from October 2nd, 2021 to November 30th, 2021, which is today. These extensions provided both parties more time to evaluate their options and best next steps. The purpose of this item is to seek authorization to enter into an updated employment agreement with County Council Steve Dingle. I have listed 2 options for the board's consideration today in your packet. 1, the board can approve the updated contract attached to the board order, or 2, the board can decline to approve the updated employment contract for the 2022 calendar year. Staff recommends option 1, as this best provides the time to create and implement a well-planned transition strategy while retaining critical staffing in the County Council's office for the next year, and reducing the need to hire outside legal counsel to cover legal issues in 2022. Chair, at this time, I turn this back to you for discussion and decision. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And for purposes of moving this forward, do I hear a motion, and what we can then discuss the motion? Yes, Vice Chair Farr.
Thank you, Chair Bernie. For the purpose of discussion, the motion, I would like to make the motion, which is move Order 21-11-30-09 in the matter of updating County Council's employment agreement. And if there is a second to the motion, I would like to speak first to the motion.
I'll second.
Was that you, Commissioner Buck? Commissioner Trieger, I saw your head go up and down, but it was you. I'm sorry. Vice Chair Farr has moved and Commissioner Trieger has seconded approval of Order 21-11-30-09 in the matter of updating County Council's employment agreement. Commissioner Farr, did you say you wish to speak to this motion?
Indeed, Chair Bernie, thank you very much. Just a real brief statement, and it's regarding County Council himself. County Council is Steve Dingle. We have two employees, one of whom is Steve Dingle. I'd like to express my strong support and my appreciation for the remarkable amount of work that's accomplished by Steve Dingle and by the professional and clerical staff in his division. You know, Chair, everybody, we take for granted every single agenda item we consider. Every board order we pass is scrutinized by legal staff before it's even placed on our agenda. Every element of risk that the county encounters on our roads, facilities, in our public lands, all the way from the Hasita Head Lighthouse to the top of the Three Sisters, is under the umbrella of the work of the County Council and the office. It's scrutinized, it's responded to by legal staff. One other thing I'll mention is at another point on the matrix of work that's accomplished by the legal staff, monitoring ongoing litigation both by and against the county measure in the multi-millions of dollars with clear and obvious impact on our county services. County Council serves all departments in Lane County. County Council serves all departments in Lane County and receives high ratings universally from across department lines. I want to thank you, Mr. Dingle, and your staff for the work you personally accomplish and for the stable professional staff whose effective work you facilitate.
Thank you, Vice Chair. Are there any other comments on this item? Yes, Commissioner Bozovich.
Thank you. And I too would like to thank Mr. Dingle for his nearly 9 years of service to Lane County. Mr. Dingle is well respected in the legal community and is well respected by other county councils around the state and is thought of very highly in his position. And despite a 360 evaluation that exceeds expectations, on September 22nd, Commissioner Buck moved and Commissioner Trieger seconded a motion to terminate Mr. Dingle's contract. In the discussion of that, comments were made that were damaging to Mr. Dingle's reputation, and I apologize for that to Mr. Dingle. But those discussions caused a near mutiny of staff from the county demanding that we retain Mr. Dingle. At the same time, this was during an extreme labor shortage in our country, and the ability to replace Mr. Dingle and any of his staff that was threatening to leave with him would have been extremely difficult. Knowing all this, it gave Mr. Dingle leverage in his negotiations of a contract extension when it was realized that we could not terminate him because it would be so difficult to replace somebody at his level, knowing it usually takes months to recruit and hire somebody. That leverage has caused his new contract to be approximately $190,000 higher than the previous contract. Now, some of that is explainable in that he was due for a raise, but much of that, and I estimate about 150,000 of that, is purely due to the fact that operating at the behest of special interest groups, there was an attempt to terminate him. And for that, Mr. Dingle, I apologize. I wish we had just gone straight to an extension of your contract as your evaluation justified, and we would be moving forward with that and not a contract that is basically transitioning you out of your long-held position and, as Vice Chair Farr mentioned, well serving our community. I will support this motion because I do believe it's very important that Mr. Dingle stay on for as long as possible to provide a good transition. I'm just sorry that it has had to happen this way. I'm sorry that the taxpayers of Lane County are paying a $150,000 premium for the mistake that was made by some of these commissioners.
Well, I'll tell you what, do any other commissioners wish to speak? Although my request would be we look forward instead of in the rear view mirror at this point in time. Seeing none, I'm going to call the vote. All those in favor of Order 21-11-30-09 in the matter of updating County Council's employment agreement, please signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed? Well, let the record show that despite comments, we have a unanimous Board of Commissioners that is supporting continuing with Mr. Dingle's employment agreement. And I simply, I'm sorry, let's do this right. Let the record show that Order 21-11-30-09, moved by Vice Chair Farr, seconded by Commissioner Trieger, has been approved by this board unanimously, 5 votes to 0. And my comment before we recess and then re-adjourn at 1:30 this afternoon is that I think that this is going to provide continuity. These are extremely difficult waters we're in. I believe this board is going to receive fairly shortly news about opioid settlements, which this board unanimously is trying to get as much money delivered to local groups that can deliver services locally where needed. I'm delighted that we're going to have this continuity of leadership, and I believe that this contract also will include identifying and staffing a process so that by the end of the year, we have a new county council who's been supported by Mr. Dingle, who's given us a lot to be thankful for. So I thank the board for this. I thank Mr. Dingle, and I thank every commissioner for moving forward together. There is no executive session. I believe, unless there's other business at this time, which is usually when we come out of executive session, unless there's any commissioner that wants to make any statement, we will recess for lunch and reconvene at 1:30. Thank you all so much. Have a good lunch.
Sharon, commissioners.